beneath the endless waves of the Atlantic. Some say a city sleeps, a civilization of impossible knowledge, glittering towers, and streets that once thrummed with life. Its name, whispered through time, has become legend. Atlantis. What if I told you that the echoes of this lost world are not buried entirely beneath the sea, but scattered across human history, hidden in myths, in ruins, and even in the stars above? Imagine walking streets that have long vanished, hearing voices that no one else can hear, feeling the weight of a world that once was greater than anything we know today. Tonight, we will drift together into that memory, tracing the rise, the wonders, and the mysterious fall of a civilization that has haunted our imaginations for millennia. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let the story of Atlantis begin. Beneath the endless breathing of the sea, there is a silence older than memory. Imagine yourself drifting at the edge of sleep, waves rising and falling against the black horizon. The air heavy with salt, the stars scattered like fragments of forgotten stories. It is in this silence, somewhere between waking and dreaming, that the whispers of Atlantis begin. Not in the crashing surf, nor in the gulls that call from the shore, but in the deep, slow pulse of the ocean itself. As though the water remembers what we have forgotten, you close your eyes, and the darkness begins to shape itself into a vision. A city of impossible beauty, rising out of the water like a mirage, its walls glimmering as though lit by sunlight even in the dead of night. Bridges of white stone, arching over canals that gleam with liquid fire. Towers plated in orichalcum, a metal so rare and radiant that no living craftsman has seen its equal. This is the image that stirs in the imagination, born from the words of Plato, carried across millennia like a lantern passed from one dreamer to another. Plato's voice, across the centuries, is where the legend begins. He spoke of an island empire, vast and powerful, lying beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the straits we now call Gibraltar. It was said to be larger than Libya and Asia combined, a land so rich in resources that it became the envy of all the known world. And yet, Plato did not present Atlantis merely as a place. It was a story, a caution, a myth wrapped in philosophy. He placed it within his dialogues, Timaeus and Creatus, framing it as a tale told by the wise Solon, passed down from Egyptian priests who had preserved knowledge from ages long forgotten. But even as we consider the origins of this tale, the question forms like a mist on the horizon. Was Atlantis real, or was it only ever a parable? As you drift deeper into this thought, imagine Solon, the great Athenian statesman, traveling to Egypt in the 6th century before Christ. Picture him in the shadowed halls of Sais, speaking to priests who carried memories older than Greece itself. The priests, so Plato tells us, mocked the Greeks for being children, forgetful of their own past, ignorant of the many times civilizations had risen and fallen before them. There had been floods, they said, and fires and wars that erased entire nations from the earth. Atlantis, to them, was one such nation, a memory etched into stone and story, preserved in temples while other cultures perished in flames. Solon returned with this tale, and centuries later Plato gave it shape. But did he invent details to serve his philosophy? Or was he recording a truth whispered across time? The story he left us is strangely precise. Atlantis, he said, lay on, an island ringed by concentric circles of land and sea. At its heart was a great citadel, where Poseidon himself had once walked, where a temple to the god of the sea rose in gleaming majesty, its walls lined with silver, its roof adorned in ivory, its pinnacles flashing with gold. The kings of Atlantis, descendants of Poseidon's mortal sons, ruled with justice and wisdom in the early days. They harnessed the wealth of their land, fertile plains watered by ingenious canals, mines that yielded every precious metal, forests thick with timber, herds of animals grazing across rolling fields. They built a fleet of ships, they sent emissaries abroad, and their power stretched across the sea, reaching as far as Egypt, as far as Italy, pressing against the growing might of Athens itself. Yet Plato's story is not one of eternal glory, for with prosperity came arrogance, and with power came corruption. The kings of Atlantis, once noble, grew restless and proud. They sought to expand beyond their shores, to dominate not just their neighbors, but the entire known world. Their armies crossed the seas, their warships blackened the horizon, and the earth trembled under the sound of their marching. It was then, Plato tells us, that Athens rose against them, a city still young and fragile, but possessed of a fierce spirit. Against all odds, the Athenians repelled the Atlantean advance, humbling the empire that had sought to subdue them. And then, in a single terrible night, came the end. The earth shook, the seas rose, and Atlantis sank beneath the waves, vanishing into the depths, leaving nothing but memory. But as you listen, as you drift further into this story, you sense that something deeper lies beneath Plato's words. Was it only allegory, a symbolic tale meant to warn against hubris, to remind nations that even the mightiest can fall? Or was there something more, an echo of real events, a fragment of lost history woven into philosophy? The curiosity lingers, like a half-forgotten dream, teasing the edges of your imagination. For if Atlantis never existed, why does the story feel so strangely familiar? Why does it live on, generation after generation, as though the world itself refuses to let it fade? Perhaps it is because the sea is the greatest keeper of secrets. The ocean floor is a library of forgotten chapters, its shelves endless, its pages drowned in silt and shadow. Think of how little we know, even now, in this age of satellites and submarines. Vast stretches of the deep remain unexplored, darkened. Chambers where whole continents might sleep in silence. What else lies beneath? Cities swallowed by tsunamis, temples cracked open by earthquakes, civilizations erased in the blink of an eye. We know such things have happened again and again. Entire cultures have vanished from history, their names lost, their ruins buried. Is it really so impossible that Atlantis was one of them? Close your eyes and let the vision of that city return. Picture its harbors crowded with ships, the scent of spice and resin heavy in the air, traders shouting in tongues now lost, coins of copper and gold exchanged beneath awnings of woven cloth. Hear the ring of hammers in the forges, the chant of priests echoing through marble halls, the laughter of children playing in streets paved with shining stone. This was not a place of shadows and myths for those who lived there. It was home. It was life. And if the ocean claimed it, as the story says, it must have done so with a terrible finality. A roar of waves that swallowed voices mid-cry, Deluge that tore apart walls, that scattered families, that left behind only silence and the endless roll of the tide. Imagine standing on a hillside, watching your world disappear beneath the sea, knowing no one would ever remember. But we have remembered, or at least we have dreamed. From the philosophers of Greece to the mystics of the Renaissance, from explorers of the age of discovery to seekers of the modern world, Atlantis has remained a beacon, half real, half mirage. It has been placed everywhere, in the Atlantic, in the Mediterranean, in the Caribbean, beneath the ice of Antarctica. It has been connected to floods, to lost technologies, to alien gods and ancient wisdom. Each theory adds to the fascination, not because it solves the mystery, but because it deepens it. The not knowing is what gives it power. The unanswered question is what makes us lean closer. As you drift towards sleep, think of the way stories themselves are like tides. They surge, they recede, they return again in cycles. Atlantis is one such tide, washing over us again and again, leaving traces in our dreams, pulling us further into its current. Whether it was ever real may matter less than the fact that we cannot let it go. It has become more than a city. It is a mirror we hold to ourselves, a reminder of our own rise and fall, of the fragility that lies beneath our pride. For if Atlantis could fall, so too could we. If Atlantis could vanish, what of all we build, all we treasure, all we believe will last forever? And so the ocean keeps its silence. The waves roll on, hiding their secret. You feel yourself swaying with them, as though rocked by the vast cradle of the sea. The story has only begun. We have only touched the surface of what Atlantis means, of where it may lie, of how it has shaped the imagination of countless generations. There are deeper waters, still darker mysteries waiting. But for now, the city sleeps beneath the waves, and so too may you. The sea does not hurry, yet it erases more than time can measure. In its patience, it swallows shores, reshapes continents, and turns mountains into grains of sand. And within that endless cycle of creation and ruin lies the lingering question: if Atlantis ever existed, where did it fall? Where, beneath all this water, might its broken stones still sleep? To follow this question is to walk a path between science and myth, between memory and imagination. Each step brings us closer, yet never close enough. It is a path that has drawn explorers, philosophers, and dreamers across thousands of years, pulling them toward the horizon as if the ocean itself were whispering a summons they could not resist. Begin with the words of Plato. They are the first coordinates, the fragile compass by which so many have set their course. He tells us Atlantis lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the narrow strait where the Mediterranean spills into the Atlantic. To the ancients, that boundary was more than geography. It was the threshold between the known and the unknown. On one side, familiar lands, bustling ports, the heart of civilization. On the other, an endless ocean, a wilderness of water stretching into mystery. To place Atlantis beyond those pillars was to cast it into the realm of the unimaginable, a place both real and unreal, possible and impossible. Yet it was not only distance that made it strange, it was scale. Plato wrote of an island larger than Libya and Asia combined, a landmass so vast that if true, it would have reshaped the maps of the ancient world. For centuries, this detail alone has ignited speculation. Some argue Plato exaggerated, that his words were metaphor, that he wished not to record history, but to dramatize philosophy. Yet others hold fast to the possibility that he was describing something the ancients had truly known, a continent, a lost world erased in catastrophe. And if so, where might it be found? Some point to the Mediterranean itself, suggesting that the pillars were mistranslated, that Atlantis was not beyond them but within. The island of Santorini, once called Thera, is often named in this breath, for there, in the Aegean, the earth tore itself apart in one of the greatest volcanic eruptions known to history. A flourishing civilization was buried under ash and fire, its cities shattered, its people scattered by tsunamis that swept across the sea. The echoes of that disaster, some say, may have reached Greece and inspired the tale of Atlantis. Yet the Mediterranean feels too small, too confined. The scale of Plato's description, the grandeur of his vision, demands something greater. This is why so many eyes turn to the Atlantic itself, to the open ocean that has always been both pathway and barrier. Imagine for a moment standing on the cliffs of Gibraltar, looking westward into the endless blue. The wind rushes against your face, carrying the salt of distant storms. Out there lies nothing but horizon, and yet, perhaps, once there lay something more. Could there have been an island continent, a land that bridged Europe and the Americas, now vanished beneath the waves? To picture it is to feel the weight of possibility pressing against the silence of the sea. In the 19th century, this idea captured the imagination of the world in a way it never had before. Writers and scholars began to speak of Atlantis not as myth, but as memory. Among them was Ignatius Donnelly, an American congressman turned author, whose book, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, painted a vision that mesmerized readers. To Donnelly, Atlantis was no parable. It was the cradle of civilization, the mother culture from which Egypt, Mesopotamia, and even the Americas drew their wisdom. He argued that the similarities in myth, in architecture, in language across distant lands were no coincidence. They were the fingerprints of a shared origin, a lost homeland that once united humanity. Atlantis, he declared, was that homeland, and its destruction was the great flood remembered in every tradition. Donnelly's words burned bright, and for many they reshaped the legend into something larger than Plato himself had imagined. The lost continent became a stage upon which all mysteries might be explained. Why do pyramids rise in both Egypt and Mesoamerica, Atlantis? Why do flood myths appear in cultures, oceans apart, Atlantis? Why do fragments of advanced knowledge seem to glimmer in the ruins of ancient societies? Atlantis. It was a story that seemed to answer everything, and in doing so, it drew people deeper into its current. Yet the more Atlantis explained, the less solid it became, like sand slipping between the fingers. For to believe in it was to demand proof, and proof remained elusive. Still, the ocean does not easily surrender its secrets. In the 20th century, explorers claimed to have glimpsed ruins on the seafloor, walls, pavements, even pyramids. Photographs were taken, sonar readings captured, tales whispered of discoveries too strange to dismiss. One of the most famous surfaced near the Bahamas, where divers reported seeing vast stone blocks laid out like a road, the so-called Bimini Road, to some. It was evidence of a drowned city, perhaps a remnant of Atlantis itself. To others, it was only natural rock formations, the ocean shaping stones into illusions that mimic design. The debate lingers, unresolved, each side convinced of its truth, and so it goes with nearly every alleged discovery. Off the coast of Cuba, sonar images suggested the outlines of structures deep beneath the waves. Off Spain, divers found walls that seemed too regular to be natural. Off Japan, the Yonaguni Monument, a massive stone structure beneath the sea, sparked arguments that rage to this day. Are these remnants of forgotten civilizations, or are they simply the tricks of geology and imagination? The line between nature and artifice blurs when viewed through the restless lens of longing. We want Atlantis to be real, and so we see it. Everywhere, in every ruin, in every unexplained pattern. Yet perhaps this longing itself is part of the story. Perhaps Atlantis is less a place than a reflection of our desire to know where we come from, to stitch together the scattered fragments of our past into a single narrative. The myth endures because it feeds a hunger we cannot quiet, the hunger for origins, for a golden age that explains who we are and where we are headed. And in that sense, whether it exists or not, Atlantis becomes real in another way. It becomes a compass, pointing not outward to the sea, but inward to the mysteries we carry within ourselves. Still, the search continues. Scientists map the ocean floor with satellites, scanning for anomalies. Divers descend into trenches with lights that cut through eternal dark. Archaeologists sift through ruins, comparing motifs, seeking patterns, and always the whisper remains. Perhaps we are close. Perhaps one day we will uncover the stones themselves, the undeniable proof of a world that once was. If that day comes, what would it mean? Would we marvel at its beauty or tremble at its warning? For Atlantis, as Plato told it, was not destroyed without reason. Its downfall came when arrogance eclipsed wisdom, when power drowned humility. If we are its descendants, if we walk the earth it once ruled, then perhaps its story is less about what lies beneath the waves, and more about what lies ahead of us. And yet, even as we weigh its meaning, the vision lingers. Picture Atlantis, not in ruins, but alive. Its harbors filled with sails, its streets thrumming with life. Hear the rhythm of hammers on stone, the murmur of fountains, the song of wind chimes swaying from balconies. Imagine the library of Atlantis, filled with scrolls that recorded knowledge long since lost, maps of the world before the flood, treatises on stars and cycles, formulas for metals and medicines unknown to us now. Imagine standing in a great hall where philosophers debated, where astronomers traced the paths of Venus and Jupiter, where healers spoke of cures that could ease the suffering of generations. What if all this once existed, and what if all this was erased in a single night? To consider that possibility is to feel the weight of fragility pressing against the present moment. For if they could vanish, why not us? If the sea could claim them, could it not also claim what we build? And so the mystery deepens. Atlantis is everywhere and nowhere. It lies in the volcanic slopes of Santorini, in the coral sands of the Caribbean, in the icy plains of Antarctica, in the sonar echoes beneath Cuban waters. It lies in our myths, in our books, in our restless dreams. It is a city that will not die, a story that cannot sink. For every generation, it rises anew, reborn in speculation, shimmering just beyond reach. Perhaps this is the true secret of Atlantis, that it is less a city and more a mirror, reflecting back to us the questions we cannot silence. Who are we? Where do we come from? What might we become? And what might destroy us? The sea does not answer. It only breathes, patient and eternal. And as you drift with it, listening to its rhythm, you realize the search for Atlantis is not about finding stone walls in the deep. It is about finding ourselves in the story, about recognizing that the lost city is also the lost part of us, the memory of something we once were or could be again. The ocean holds it, yes, but so too does the mind, carrying it forward like a flame that will not go out. The waves still roll in, patient as breath, eternal as the stars, and we follow them once more toward the fading edges of memory. The first voices of Atlantis have been heard through Plato, through stories retold across centuries, but even in his dialogues, he spoke of sources older than himself. He told his listeners that the tale did not spring from his own imagination, nor from Greek invention, but from a story handed down through generations of Egyptian priests. If this was true, then the legend was already ancient when Plato shaped it into words, and behind his account lies the shadow of even deeper origins. Tonight, we drift into those earlier echoes to see where they may guide us. Plato wrote that his ancestor Solon, the great lawgiver of Athens, had once journeyed to Egypt many centuries before. There, in the sacred city of Sais, he conversed with priests who preserved records in their temples, inscriptions that spoke of times before the Greeks had any history to boast of. Solon, curious and proud of his people's achievements, had spoken of floods, of kings, and of the earliest memory of Greek civilization. Yet the priests had smiled, almost with pity, and told him that the Greeks were like children, their history continually erased by fire and flood. You remember only one flood, they told him, but many have passed over mankind, sweeping away what came before. And in those records, carved and painted and guarded, they spoke of Atlantis. The priests described a great power that had risen beyond the pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. They told of an island larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined, a land rich and vast that once launched fleets against the Mediterranean world. This was not a fleeting story, but one inscribed in their records. And they told Solon that in the distant age, 9,000 years before, Atlantis had grown mighty and had been brought low by catastrophe. Plato, in retelling this tale, set the age of Atlantis at far deeper antiquity than many could accept, stretching memory beyond the known limits of archaeology into the realm of almost unimaginable time. To lie back now, eyes heavy, is to imagine Solon himself, listening in the cool halls of an Egyptian temple, his footsteps echoing on polished stone, the smell of incense in the air. He listens with a heart half eager and half doubtful, trying to absorb the vision of a civilization so old that even the pyramids, standing tall outside, would seem young in comparison. The priests, their voices low and measured, unfold the tale with the calm of men repeating something preserved like a sacred flame. They tell of the sons of Poseidon who ruled Atlantis, of the 10 kingdoms bound together, of the wealth and order of the city. they tell of wars that stretched across the sea, of the final great clash when Athens itself stood in resistance against the overwhelming Atlantean power. And then, with solemn words, they tell of the end, how a single terrible day and night of fire and earthquake swallowed the island, sending it beneath the sea. How the waters claimed it, leaving behind only a memory, only a caution written into stone and ritual. Solon listened, and perhaps he dreamed of carrying the story home, to impress his fellow Athenians, to inscribe in poetry the majesty of what he had heard. But Solon did not finish the work. It would be left to Plato, generations later, to take up the fragments of his ancestors' notes and weave them into the dialogues that have haunted the imagination of the world ever since. Yet what strikes us, lying in the hush of this night, is the layering of memory. Plato writes what Solon once heard. Solon heard what Egyptian priests once guarded. The priests spoke of records that were themselves already ancient. And what of those records? Were they myths etched as parables, or were they genuine accounts of catastrophes long lost to time? Did the Egyptians recall some memory of the Thera eruption when a volcanic blast shattered the island of Santorini, bringing tidal waves that devastated Crete and the Aegean? Or were they pointing to a story, even older, of floods that washed across lands in the Ice Age, when seas rose and swallowed coastlines that once held villages and fields? As you drift deeper into thought, the layers of transmission become like ripples spreading across a pond. Each teller of the story reshapes it slightly, casting it in the mold of their culture, their concerns, their sense of what a story should do. The Egyptians, proud of their long records, may have placed Atlantis deep in antiquity to emphasize their own endurance. Solon, proud of Athens, may have remembered most vividly the account of how his city once resisted the might of the Atlanteans. Plato, philosopher above all, may have emphasized Atlantis less as literal history and more as moral allegory, showing the dangers of hubris, the inevitable fall of nations that grow too proud. And yet, through all these layers, the city itself gleams like a beacon beneath the waves, refusing to be erased, rising again in every retelling. Consider how strange it is that so many peoples have stories of floods, of lands that vanished beneath the sea. The Epic of Gilgamesh, older than the Bible, tells of a flood sent to cleanse the world, and of a man who built a vessel to survive it. The Hebrew scriptures echo this in the tale of Noah, the Ark, and the rising waters. Across India, China, and the Americas, tales of deluge resound. Stories of a time when the sea rose and covered all that was known. These are not always the same, not always pointing to Atlantis, but they resonate with a memory of upheaval, of waters reshaping the earth. Could Atlantis be one expression of that collective memory, a story told and retold wherever human beings tried to grasp the enormity of disaster? The Egyptians themselves lived along the Nile, where floods were a rhythm of life, a blessing and a danger. Perhaps to them, the image of a land drowned beneath the sea carried particular weight. Imagine a scribe dipping his brush into black ink, recording the priestly tales on a scroll, his lines flowing across the papyrus in sacred script. He writes of distant lands, of empires long past, of cataclysms so far back in time that no witness remained. The story becomes not just a tale of a people, but a mirror for all people, a lesson on the fragility of greatness. And yet, we wonder, could records truly have preserved an account 9,000 years old when Solon heard it? Even by modern reckoning, that would place Atlantis deep into the Stone Age. Long before the pyramids, long before even agriculture had spread widely across the earth. To modern historians, it seems implausible. But to the dreamer, to the seeker, to those who close their eyes and let the imagination drift, it suggests that perhaps there were civilizations before the ones we know, erased almost entirely, leaving only faint whispers. Could there have been a time when humans built in stone, mastered crafts, and raised cities, only to see it all swallowed when the seas rose at the end of the Ice Age? And if so, could Atlantis be the fragmentary memory of that world carried down in story and in symbol? The priests told Solon that after Atlantis fell, the sea where it had been became impassable. Mud and debris choked the waters. Ships could not sail across. Was this poetic flourish, or some recollection of a shoal or sunken shelf? In Plato's time, it was said that beyond the pillars of Heracles lay only endless ocean, empty and vast. Yet the Egyptians spoke of that ocean as once alive with fleets and commerce, and of Atlantis as a bridge between continents. To imagine this now is to see the Atlantic not as a barrier but as a highway, and to picture lands long vanished where now there is only sea. So the legend deepens. Atlantis is not just Plato's moral tale. It is not just Solon's curiosity. It is not just Egyptian priestly record. It is all of these, layered, interwoven, surviving through centuries of repetition and transformation. And at the heart of it lies the irresistible pull of a lost world, a golden city beneath the waves. Even now, as you rest, your mind may wander. What if Solon had finished his poem? What if he had carved Atlantis into the Greek imagination centuries earlier? Would Plato's dialogues have been necessary, or would the world have inherited a very different version of the tale? Perhaps Atlantis would have lived less as philosophy and more as epic, less as a caution and more as an inspiration. But we have only what has survived, and that survival is enough to keep the mystery alive. The night stretches on, the sea still murmurs against unseen shores, and Atlantis waits, half story, half memory, entirely unforgettable. The sea is a patient archivist. It remembers in ways that paper and parchment cannot, holding in its depths the ruins of coastlines, the bones of forgotten ships, and perhaps the foundations of cities swallowed whole. If the Egyptian priests gave us the oldest whispers of Atlantis, and if Plato gave us the shape of the tale, then the ocean itself is the third storyteller, one whose voice we are only beginning to learn how to hear. Tonight, as the tides roll against the shore, we follow that voice into the realm of evidence, fragments, and possibility. For centuries after Plato wrote of Atlantis, most scholars dismissed the story as allegory, a myth crafted for philosophical teaching. Yet explorers, adventurers, and dreamers never let it rest. They listened to the ocean's silence and wondered if it concealed the echoes of truth. They combed coastlines, mapped seafloors, and sought ruins beneath the waves. And though most findings were dismissed, a curious pattern emerges across the globe. In places far from one another lie the remains of structures that seem to resist the ordinary timeline of human history. Begin with the island of Crete, where the ruins of Nasus tell of the Minoan civilization. Here was a people whose palaces were vast and labyrinthine, whose artistry was vivid, whose fleets sailed the seas of the Aegean. They flourished around 2000 BC, centuries before classical Greece rose to prominence. And then, almost overnight, they collapsed. Scholars point to the eruption of Thera, the island we now call Santorini, as the culprit. A volcano of such ferocity that it tore the island apart, unleashing waves that scoured Crete's coasts and clouds of ash that darkened the skies. Was this Atlantis? Some have said yes, that Plato's story was simply a distorted memory of Thera, magnified by distance and retelling. But the Minoans were not beyond the pillars of Heracles. They were not an island greater than Libya and Asia combined. Their collapse was terrible, but it did not erase them from history. Their frescoes remain, their artifacts remain, their myths remain. Atlantis, by contrast, was said to vanish utterly, swallowed by the sea with no trace left to fit. Thera into the mold of Atlantis is tempting, but perhaps too small. So seekers look further, out into the Atlantic itself, two islands scattered like stepping stones across the waves. The Azores, 9 volcanic peaks rising from the deep, became for many a candidate. Located almost directly where Plato described Atlantis to be, they seem like the tips of mountains that might once have formed a greater land, now drowned. Early explorers returning from the Azores told of mysterious stone roads beneath the sea, of walls and causeways glimpsed through clear waters. Divers in later centuries spoke of blocks too regular to be natural. Could these be remnants of a sunken civilization, or only tricks of volcanic rock? In the Bahamas, near the island of Bimini, another puzzle stirs the imagination. In the 1960s, divers discovered what seemed to be a massive stone roadway beneath the shallow waters, a long stretch of rectangular blocks laid out in neat formation, called the Bimini Road. It inspired immediate speculation. Was this a pier, a harbor, a remnant of Atlantis? Some geologists argue it is natural limestone fractured into straight shapes by the processes of erosion. But to others, the precision, the scale, the very improbability of such formations whisper of human hands at work, long before history remembers. Close your eyes and picture it. A city of white stone rising from turquoise waters, colonnades shining in the sun, broad causeways extending into the sea, ships with sails like wings moving in and out, laden with copper, tin, and gold, merchants, priests, architects, and storytellers, building a world both familiar and utterly alien. If it once stood where now lies the Bimini Road, then the waves are not only its destroyer, but also its guardian, keeping the ruins safe until we are ready to see them. In Japan, far across the Pacific, divers in the 1980s discovered another marvel, the Yonaguni Monument, a massive stepped structure submerged off the coast of Okinawa. It looks, to the human eye, like a pyramid, with terraces, stairways, and platforms. Some scholars insist it is nothing more than a natural formation, shaped by the region's sandstone fractures. Others argue passionately that its angles are too sharp, its shapes too deliberate to be chance. If it is artificial, it would rewrite what we know of early civilization in Asia. And while it may not be Atlantis, it deepens the question. Could great cities, older than our histories allow, have been swallowed by the sea across the world? The ocean floor itself is a frontier of mystery. We have mapped the surfaces of the Moon and Mars more thoroughly than the vast plains beneath the Atlantic. What lies there, hidden under miles of water, may hold answers we have not yet dared to imagine. Sonar has revealed ridges, plateaus, and even what seem to be grid-like formations. In 2009, Google Earth data briefly showed a massive pattern off the coast of Africa that some claimed resembled city streets, before scientists explained it as an artifact of sonar scanning. Yet the excitement revealed something deeper, the yearning for proof, for one glimpse of stone foundations where they should not be. Atlantis is not alone in its mystery. The ocean has swallowed other cities we know once stood off the coast of India near Dwarka. Archaeologists have found submerged ruins that some connect to ancient texts describing the city of Krishna. In the Mediterranean, parts of Alexandria lie beneath the waves, with palaces and temples still being uncovered. Off the coast of Cuba, sonar scans once revealed vast structures deep underwater, though expeditions have struggled to confirm what they might be. Each discovery reminds us that the sea is not only a destroyer, but also a keeper of time, hiding entire worlds until we stumble upon them. And so we return to Atlantis, and to the possibility that Plato's tale was not entirely invention. Perhaps he magnified, reshaped, moralized. But perhaps, beneath the philosopher's intentions, there is a kernel of truth, a memory of a civilization drowned and forgotten. The Egyptians spoke of it as real. Solon believed it worth noting. Plato preserved it, even if as allegory. And explorers ever since have searched, driven by the sense that the sea still holds secrets waiting to rise. What is it about the idea of Atlantis that captures us so deeply? It is not only the allure of treasure or the grandeur of lost palaces. It is something more profound, the possibility that human history is not a straight line, but a broken circle, that civilizations may have risen and fallen long before our textbooks begin. To imagine Atlantis is to imagine that we are not the first to dream of cities of marble and light, that others have walked this path only to vanish, leaving behind faint whispers in stone and story. Now, as the waves hush against the shore of your own thoughts, the sea's voice grows softer. It is not telling you where Atlantis lies. It is telling you something more subtle, that forgetting and remembering are partners, that beneath every surface lies another story, and that the world, you know, is only the most recent layer of something older, vaster, and still alive beneath the waves. And so we close this chapter with the sea still whispering. The story is not resolved, nor should it be. Atlantis waits, whether in the depths of the Atlantic, the shadows of memory, or the chambers of imagination. What matters is not only whether it existed, but that it continues to exist in every question we ask, in every ruin we study, in every dream we allow ourselves to follow. There are stories that exist not to tell us what happened, but to remind us what always happens. Atlantis is one of them. Imagine sitting by a fire in a cave, or on the steps of a temple, or in a quiet medieval hall as the evening bells ring, and hearing the same tale told over and over across the centuries, a land once radiant with beauty, a people once noble with purpose, a golden age slowly dimming until, at last, the sea rose up and carried it all away. The details changed, the setting the characters, the gods or spirits who punish or protect, but the pattern remains. A rise, a fall, and a lesson left behind. Atlantis is not merely a city beneath the sea. It is a mirror of our deepest patterns, a myth that whispers of memory, morality, and possibility. When Plato first wrote of Atlantis, he gave us more than a geography lesson. He gave us an allegory, though whether he intended it as pure invention or as a story rooted in some real tradition, we may never know. In his words, Atlantis was not only about land and sea, but about virtue and corruption, about a people who once lived in harmony with nature and the divine, who then strayed into arrogance, greed, and domination. Their punishment came not from some arbitrary act of vengeance, but as the natural consequence of imbalance. The sea swallowed them, and their story was preserved as both history and warning. This pattern, the noble rise, the fatal follicles, through myth after myth. Consider the tale of Icarus. Wings of wax and feather give him flight, but his joy turns to hubris, and he flies too close to the sun. The wax melts, the wings fail, and he plummets into the sea. Or the Tower of Babel, built high by human hands, until the divine confounds their speech and scatters them across the earth. These stories share with Atlantis a theme. Those who forget their limits, who believe themselves invincible, are humbled by forces greater than themselves. And yet, there is more. For in every telling of Atlantis, just as in the myths of floods and towers and wings, there is a strange pull of admiration, even longing. We do not only pity the Atlanteans, we wonder at them. Their temples plated with silver and gold, their knowledge of navigation and astronomy, their works of art and engineering that shone even brighter in Plato's imagination than the Athens he loved. We see their arrogance, yes, but also their magnificence. We cannot help but ask, what if they were real? What if such a civilization truly existed thousands of years before the records we now call history? It is here that Atlantis ceases to be only a cautionary tale and becomes a dream. Francis Bacon dreamed of it when he wrote The New Atlantis, imagining a society where science and wisdom guided human progress, free from corruption and decay. Mystics and esoteric traditions dreamed of it when they spoke of Atlanteans as guardians of ancient knowledge, initiates of mysteries that survived in Egypt, in Mesoamerica, in the temples of forgotten lands. Even in modern times, seekers of hidden truths dream of Atlantis as a place where human potential was once fully realized, only to be lost, perhaps to be found again. But why does Atlantis grip us so powerfully, even now? Perhaps it is because its themes are not distant. They live in us. Who has not felt the rise and fall of their own hopes, their own pride, their own overreach? Who has not built something they thought would last, only to see it collapse? Atlantis is not only a story about them, but about us. We are the Atlanteans every time we climb too high without balance, every time we forget our place within the larger world. And yet, as much as Atlantis warns, it also beckons. Think of the myths of floods. In Mesopotamia, Utnapishtim, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, builds a boat to survive the deluge. In the Hebrew scriptures, Noah does the same. In Hindu tradition, Manu is guided by a divine fish to preserve life upon the waters. These stories all end not with despair, but with renewal. The flood washes away corruption, but leaves behind a remnant, a chance to begin again. Perhaps Atlantis is the same, not merely the end of a civilization, but the seed of others. Imagine survivors fleeing the drowning land, carrying with them fragments of knowledge, of story, of art. They reach distant shores. Perhaps some arrive in Egypt, where they teach geometry and astronomy. Perhaps others cross oceans, leaving traces in Mesoamerican calendars or Andean temples. This idealist, by many historians, embraced by dreamers, suggests that Atlantis never entirely died. It simply transformed, scattering its wisdom across the earth like seeds upon the wind. This is why, in so many esoteric traditions, Atlantis is not just a ruin beneath the waves, it is a wellspring. The theosophists of the 19th century spoke of Atlanteans as an advanced root race, ancestors of humanity, carriers of spiritual knowledge. Writers of the occult linked Atlantis to the mysteries of pyramids, to sacred geometry, even to the lost science of controlling energy itself. For them, Atlantis was not just history, but destiny, a reminder of where we came from and what we might return to. But myths are not only inherited stories, they are also archetypes, patterns written into the human psyche. Carl Jung, the psychologist, wrote that myths endure because they reflect the deep structures of the unconscious mind. The flood is not only about water, it is about cleansing, about endings and new beginnings. The Golden Age is not only about a place long ago, it is about our longing for wholeness, for harmony we feel we have lost. Atlantis is one of these archetypes. It symbolizes the lost paradise, the fall from grace, the hope of recovery. That is why it lingers, why it rises again in each generation, why even now we find ourselves drawn to it in the quiet hours of the night. Let yourself picture it now. The sea is calm, the stars bright overhead. Beneath the waves, ruins lie, hidden columns, half buried in sand. Carvings smoothed by centuries of currents, stones that once formed palaces and streets, now home to fish and coral. You drift downward in imagination, passing through layers of water into this sunken world. What was once noise and music and laughter is now silence. What was once firelight and feasting is now darkness, pierced only by the glow of deep-sea life. And yet the stones remain. They whisper, not in words, but in presence. We were here. We built. We dreamed. And though we fell, our story endures. This vision is both haunting and comforting. Haunting because it reminds us how fragile even the greatest civilizations are. Comforting because it shows us that nothing is truly lost. Stories remain, symbols remain, lessons remain. Atlantis is gone, perhaps, but it is also here, shaping our thoughts, our fears, our aspirations. It is proof that memory is stronger than stone. Think now of our own time. We build skyscrapers that rise like Babel. We fly not with wax, but with steel and fire. We harness energies that can warm or destroy the planet. Are we not, like the Atlanteans, living in a golden age that could, with one imbalance, tip into disaster? Atlantis, then, is not only a story of the past, but a mirror of the present. It warns us, do not forget your limits. Do not confuse your brilliance with invincibility. Respect the forces greater than yourself, or they will remind you of them. And yet, always the other side, Atlantis, is also promise. It tells us that humanity has always dreamed of greatness, of harmony, of beauty. The Atlanteans may have fallen, but they remind us that civilizations can rise, that wisdom can guide power, that perhaps one day we may find the balance they lost. That is why artists, philosophers, mystics, and seekers return to Atlantis again and again, not only to mourn, but to hope. As the night deepens and your breathing slows, imagine the waves again. They rise, they fall, steady as time itself. Each wave is a civilization, each crest a golden age, each trough a fall. But always the waves return. The sea does not end, and neither do we. Atlantis may have vanished beneath the waters, but in story, in symbol, in the collective memory of humankind, it still rises. It lives in every flood myth, every dream of paradise lost, every vision of paradise to come. So rest now, carried gently on the tide of this ancient story. The sea is vast, but you are safe upon its waters. Atlantis sinks and rises and sinks. Again, not to frighten, but to teach. Its lesson is simple, eternal. Remember who you are and dream of what you may yet become. The waves hush against unseen shores, and the night leans closer, drawing you deeper into the tale. For so long, Atlantis has been described in terms of glory and grandeur, of gleaming temples and streets lined with precious stones, of a people touched by the gods themselves. Yet every civilization is more than its triumphs. Every society carries within it questions, doubts, and shadows that do not always fit neatly into the stories carved by later generations. Tonight, as we drift further into the legend, we find ourselves wandering the avenues not of marble, but of mystery. The heart of Atlantis, for all its brightness, beats with secrets. Imagine the city at twilight. The golden sheen of the temples is softened by the fading light. The canals are still, reflecting the glow of torches that flicker along the walls. Citizens pass quietly in the streets, some hurrying home with baskets of fruit, others pausing to talk at doorways. On the surface, it is serene, perfect almost. Yet beneath this calm, one might sense an undercurrent, a whisper of unease that winds its way through conversations, through glances exchanged too quickly, through records that never seem complete. For what Plato tells us is but a fragment, a shard of a much larger whole. And the question that lingers is simple: what truths were left untold? Every account of Atlantis begins with pride. The pride of its rulers, descended from Poseidon, who believed themselves guardians of a divine inheritance. The pride of engineers, who bent nature to their will, building canals, bridges, and towers that reached for the sky. And the pride of priests, who declared that the gods themselves favored their island above all others. But pride is a double-edged gift. It drives greatness, but it also feeds illusions. Perhaps even in those shining days, there were those who wondered if the Atlanteans were chasing shadows, if their ambition carried them too far from the wisdom they were meant to embody. Some whisper that beneath the temples, in chambers few were allowed to see, there lay archives of forbidden knowledge, maps of lands across the seas, records of strange machines, scrolls of prophecy that spoke of events not yet come. These were not the documents of common life, but treasures guarded by priest-kings, locked away from the citizens who walked above them. Were they secrets too dangerous for ordinary minds? Or were they simply inventions of a people who believed themselves closer to the gods than any other? We cannot say, but the legend endures. that Atlantis was not only a city of stone, but a repository of wisdom deliberately concealed. Others speak of rituals performed in shadowed courts, as fires burned, as chants rose and fell. The leaders of Atlantis sought communion with the powers they claimed as their ancestors. To outsiders, it would have seemed like reverence, but to some within their own ranks, it may have felt like something darker. Did these rites bind them to the divine, or to illusions of control? Even now, historians and dreamers alike debate whether Atlantis was lifted by genuine spiritual power, or whether its grandeur was built upon rites that blurred the line between devotion and domination. The truth, if it ever lived, is hidden in silence, but shadows need not be sinister. Some of the mysteries of Atlantis are simple gaps, absences in the record that make the imagination wander. Plato himself admits he offers only a retelling, a story carried across generations, filtered through memory and translation. In that passing from Solon to Critias to the pages we now hold, what was lost? Perhaps Atlantis was not one place, but many, a composite of cultures remembered as one. Perhaps the image of concentric rings was a poetic metaphor, not a literal map. These gaps, these silences, invite us to wonder. They give Atlantis the quality of a dream, endlessly reshaping itself in our minds. Yet, the deeper we descend, the more one question grows. Why did a city so mighty, so wise, fall? Plato tells us it was hubris, a turning from virtue to greed, a corruption that angered the gods. But perhaps the reality was less mythical and more human. Perhaps Atlantis fractured from within. Power, after all, breeds envy as much as unity. One can almost hear the echoes of arguments in council chambers, of provinces demanding more autonomy, of rival factions seeking to claim the throne. The splendor of Atlantis may have masked tensions simmering just beneath the surface, tensions that would one day break the island apart, even without the fury of earthquakes or waves. Imagine standing in one of those grand halls. Torches cast long shadows on the walls. At the center, leaders gather, voices raised not in harmony but in dispute. Some argue for expansion across the seas, claiming the gods have given them dominion. Others counsel caution, urging preservation of what they already possess. The words grow heated. Fists strike tables. Outside, citizens continue their lives, unaware that within these walls, decisions are being made that will shape the fate of the island. Was it in such rooms that the destiny of Atlantis was sealed not by natural disaster, but by human discord? Still, there are other stories, more mysterious, more haunting. Some suggest Atlantis was not destroyed at all, but withdrawn. That its people, foreseeing danger, chose to vanish into exile, carrying their treasures of wisdom with them. In this telling, the sinking of Atlantis was not a catastrophe but a disguise, a veil drawn across history to conceal their departure. If so, where did they go? Some point to Egypt, to the sudden flowering of knowledge along the Nile. Others to the Americas, where myths of sky people and ocean-born visitors whisper faintly of another age. Could it be that Atlantis did not die, but transformed, leaving behind traces that still puzzle us today? The night deepens, and as we drift further, another thought arises. What if Atlantis itself is a mirror? What if it was never meant to be a literal island at all, but a reflection of the human soul, its rise, its glory, its corruption? and its fall. These are the rhythms of every civilization, the heartbeat of human history. Perhaps that is why the story endures. Not because we seek the ruins beneath the sea, but because we recognize ourselves. In its cycle of ambition and loss, Atlantis may be a parable, a warning carried across millennia, urging us to remember that greatness without humility is but the prelude to ruin. And yet, even knowing this, we search. Divers plunge into the depths of the Mediterranean, scouring the seafloor for shattered columns. Scholars compare ancient maps, seeking outlines of lost continents. Dreamers listen to tales of the Bermuda Triangle, of pyramids buried in ocean trenches. The hunger for Atlantis is not only the hunger for knowledge, but for contact with something greater than ourselves. We long to believe that once humanity reached heights far beyond what we imagine, and that somewhere fragments of that glory might still remain. As the current carries us through these possibilities, we drift between fact and myth, between stone and story. Atlantis is never fixed, never still. It shifts with every telling, every dream. One moment it is a shining city beneath the waves, the next a metaphor for our own rise and fall, the next a code hidden in myths scattered across the world. And always, always, it remains just beyond our grasp. A horizon that recedes as we approach, a secret that promises revelation but never fully unveils itself. That, perhaps, is its greatest power, not what it reveals, but what it withholds. Now picture again the quiet streets of the island at twilight. Citizens gather around hearths, sharing food, sharing stories. Children play in courtyards. The scent of salt drifts through the air. To them, Atlantis is simply home. They cannot see themselves as we do, cannot know the weight their story will carry across ages. For them, life is ordinary until one day it is not. And in that ordinariness lies the most poignant truth, that civilizations do not imagine themselves as myths. They are simply living until history, or disaster, or the turning of time transforms them into legends. The tide of sleep draws closer. The voices of Atlantis soften, fading into the hush of waves. Yet even as you drift, one question lingers, impossible to silence. Was Atlantis ever real? Or is it the dream of humanity itself, calling us to remember what we once were, or what we might yet become? The answer, like the city, lies hidden beneath the surface, waiting for those who dare to search. And so the mystery continues, carried not only in texts and theories, but in the quiet wonder of nights like this one, when we let ourselves drift into stories that have no end. The sea is patient. It waits, always moving, yet always still, carrying in its vastness the fragments of worlds that once were. As you drift further into the story, the sense of time begins to blur. Past and present fold into one another, as though the waves themselves have no care for the clocks and calendars we hold so tightly. In this place, history is not linear. It is a tide, rising and falling, carrying with it whispers of civilizations that slip between our fingers. And at the heart of it, Atlantis still beckons now, not only as a city of wonder or a parable of pride, but as a question that refuses to rest. For in every age, in every culture, echoes of Atlantis surface again, as if the world itself cannot forget. close your eyes and imagine the scene not in Plato's Athens, but thousands of years later, in a candle-lit library. Scrolls lie open on a table, their ink faded, their edges worn. A scholar bends over them, tracing words with a careful hand. Outside, the night presses close, but inside, the flame glows, and the name Atlantis flickers once more into the air. It is not the first time, nor the last, that someone has tried to read beyond Plato, to search the shadows for what the philosopher left unsaid. Each age invents its own Atlantis, shaped by its fears, its hopes, its desires. To the Romans, Atlantis was a cautionary tale of empire. They looked upon the grandeur of their own city, its marble forums, its aqueducts stretching across valleys, and wondered if perhaps they too would one day drown in the flood of their own ambition. Two medieval monks copying Plato's words. In dim scriptoria, Atlantis was a moral allegory, a warning wrapped in myth, reminding the faithful of the dangers of pride and idolatry. To the explorers of the Renaissance, casting their sails into oceans uncharted, it was a tantalizing clue that somewhere beyond the horizon lay not only new lands, but forgotten kingdoms, rich with gold and knowledge. Each saw in Atlantis what they most longed for or feared most deeply. And in this way, the city that may never have existed lived on more powerfully than many that surely did. But the echoes are not only in books, they are in myths scattered across the world, across the ocean, in the jungles of Central America. Stories speak of ancient cities swallowed by floods of gods who punished nations with water. Among the first nations of North America, legends tell of islands that once lay far out to sea, rich and green, now gone beneath the waves. In the Pacific, on islands carved by coral and lava, chants recall lands that vanished after storms and fire. Always the same refrain, a place of plenty, struck down in a single stroke, leaving only memory behind. Could it be coincidence? Or do these scattered voices remember the same event through different tongues? The thought lingers like mist. Perhaps there was once a great land, not exactly as Plato described, but real enough that its destruction sent ripples across cultures, ripples that became myths. A volcanic island swallowed in a day, a chain of cities destroyed by flood, a people forced to scatter, carrying their stories with them to every shore they touched. The truth may not be a shining city with walls of orichalcum, but the loss of a world so sudden, so vast, that humanity could not help but weave legend around its absence. And so we ask again, was Atlantis one place, or many? Perhaps it was not a city at all, but a memory encoded into myth, a collective scar carried by humankind, reimagined each time it was told. That too would explain why Atlantis feels familiar, even to those who never read Plato, why its story resonates in cultures that never knew the name. It is the story of loss, of hubris, of the sea claiming what once seemed eternal. Every people has lived some part of that truth. Perhaps Atlantis is simply the sum of them all. But the human spirit resists loss. We search not only for what is gone, but for what might remain. And so, even as the myth grew, so did the hunt for proof. Picture the Renaissance once more. Sailors in caravels cross waters, thought endless, guided by stars and hope. On their maps, strange shapes appear, Islands half-imagined, coastlines that do not match reality. Notes in the margins, here be ruins. Here lies the land of the ancients. Each voyage carried not just the hope of discovery, but the dream of Atlantis reborn. When Columbus set sail westward, some whispered that he was seeking not only a route to Asia, but the lost isles of Plato's tale. He did not find them, but the dream only deepened, for the new lands he encountered seemed to many like fragments of that older, forgotten world. The centuries turned, and Atlantis shifted again. In the Enlightenment, scholars dissected the story with cool reason, arguing over whether it was history, metaphor, or fable. In the 19th century, as archaeology unearthed cities once thought mythical Troy from Homer's verses, Babylon from biblical lamentations, the hope grew. If those could be found, why not Atlantis? Men like Ignatius Donnelly proclaimed that all ancient civilizations sprang from its seed, that Atlantis was the cradle of culture itself. His words set imaginations alight, inspiring explorers, writers, mystics. Suddenly, Atlantis was not a cautionary tale, but a lost golden age, a paradise, waiting to be rediscovered. And in the age of steam and science, the search turned technological. Submarines and diving bells sank beneath the waves, scanning the seabed for ruins. Islands in the Atlantic, from the Azores to the Canaries, were studied as possible remnants of the sunken continent. Expeditions scoured the Mediterranean, probing the depths near Santorini, Malta, and Crete. Each stone uncovered, each ruin mapped, carried with it the question, could this be part of Atlantis? None answered it fully, but the longing grew stronger with every fragment. Meanwhile, in the world of spirit and imagination, Atlantis blossomed into something stranger still. Mystics spoke of crystals that once powered the island of energies harnessed from the earth and stars. Writers described Atlanteans as beings wiser, taller, closer to the divine, whose knowledge surpassed our own. Some even claimed to remember lives lived in Atlantis, visions of shining halls and disasters seen firsthand. Whether delusion, dream, or something beyond, these visions kept Atlantis alive, not as history, but as living myth. For while scholars debated dates and maps, dreamers felt Atlantis within them as a memory, a yearning, a symbol of perfection lost. The night carries us deeper, and with it comes the awareness that Atlantis is not one story, but many, layered, like the rings of its fabled city. At its core, perhaps, lies a real event of flood, a volcanic eruption, a land swallowed by the sea. Around that core, myth wrapped itself, carrying moral lessons of pride and punishment. Over centuries, explorers draped new hopes upon it, seeking proof of human greatness lost. Mystics turned it into a spiritual homeland, a reminder of higher truths. And now, in our own age, Atlantis floats between science and imagination, between sonar scans of ocean trenches and films that light up cinema screens. It refuses to die because it refuses to be one thing. Atlantis is a shapeshifter, always, becoming what we most need it to be. Yet with every telling, one thing endures, the sea that conceals, that erases, that preserves. If Atlantis lies anywhere, it lies beneath those shifting waves. Imagine yourself drifting, now above a deep abyss, where sunlight fades and silence reigns. Down below, perhaps, are only rocks and silt, or perhaps, hidden in darkness, are the bones of walls, the fragments of statues, the outlines of roads once walked by a vanished people. The thought is haunting because it means Atlantis may not be gone at all, only waiting. And that possibility, more than certainty, is what keeps the story alive. As you drift further into this thought, a stillness settles. You begin to sense that Atlantis is not simply about the past, it is about the present and the future. For in telling its story, each generation reveals itself. The Romans saw their empire reflected in its rise and fall. The Renaissance saw in it the promise of discovery. The 19th century saw a lost cradle of civilization. We, today, see both a warning and a reminder of ecological fragility, of how quickly greatness can vanish, and at the same time, a dream of unity, of a time when humanity might have lived closer to wisdom than we do now. Atlantis adapts because we adapt, because our longings change, but our need for myth does not. And so, the story flows onward, as endless as the tide. Somewhere, in the deep truths, may yet rest. Perhaps divers will one day find ruins unmistakable, walls too vast, too ordered to be chance. Perhaps satellites will reveal shapes beneath the ocean floor, maps carved not by nature but by hands. Or perhaps the truth will never be found, and Atlantis will remain forever out of reach, more powerful as a dream than as a fact. For what is stronger, the ruins we can touch, or the longing that keeps us searching? That is the final mystery of Atlantis, that in chasing it, we discover not a lost city, but ourselves. The waves hush again, the night leans close, Atlantis drifts back into silence, leaving only ripples in the imagination. And as you breathe deeper, slower, you realize the search does not end here. It continues in every story, every dream, every wondering gaze cast across the ocean's horizon. Atlantis is not gone. It is with us, always an island that rises, not from the sea, but from the endless depths of the human spirit. And there, in that vastness, it will never sink. The night draws itself more thickly now, as if the world beyond the curtains has receded into silence. You lie in the calm of this moment, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of your own breath, and once again the story resumes. Atlantis, that elusive land that hovers on the border between dream and memory, still holds its secrets. We have wandered through the origins of the myth, the whispers of Plato, the echoes of temples and streets, the fall into fire and water, the clues left scattered in carvings and maps. But the heart of the riddle beats on, because the legend of Atlantis has never been a single tale. It is a mirror in which countless civilizations across time and distance have seen their own reflections. And so, in this chapter, let us drift into the great sea of interpretations, reshaped it, woven it into their own song. Each retelling adds a new layer, and perhaps in their overlap, a deeper truth hides. The first current to follow is the one that returns to Egypt, where the priests of Sais are said to have first whispered the tale into Solon's ear. In those temples, beneath the heat of the desert sun, scrolls of papyrus and hieroglyphs etched into stone carried histories far older than Greece itself. The Egyptians, keepers of time, measured in cycles so vast that even the collapse of kingdoms was only another ripple in the Nile to them. The idea of a mighty empire destroyed by water was not strange. Their own myths spoke of Zep Tepi, the first time when gods walked among men and floods reshaped the land. Some scholars believe that what Plato called Atlantis may have been their memory of ancient deluges, of sea peoples who came in storms, of forgotten dynasties swallowed by shifting sands. But whether the Egyptian priests were recalling a literal land or offering a cautionary tale to a curious Greek statesman, we may never know. Still, their voice becomes the first echo in the chain. Beyond Egypt, the story spread westward and northward. The Romans, inheritors of Greek thought, saw Atlantis less as a physical place and more as a warning wrapped in grandeur. For them, it was the embodiment of hubris, the overreaching of an empire that thought itself invincible, only to be crushed by fate. To some, the Atlanteans were mirrors of Rome itself, mighty, disciplined builders of aqueducts and palaces, conquerors of distant shores. As marble arches and roads stretched outward in defiance of decay. Then the Middle Ages arrived, cloaking Europe in centuries of faith and mystery. The tale of Atlantis nearly faded, preserved only in the manuscripts of monks who copied Plato's words by candlelight. But in monasteries and cloisters, where parchment carried echoes across time, the legend remained like an ember waiting to flare again. And in those centuries, when the sea itself was thought to conceal monstrous creatures and unreachable edges, Atlantis transformed. No longer merely a Greek allegory, it became, in whispers, a place hidden just beyond the horizon. Mariners spoke of enchanted isles, of lands where towers of crystal rose from the surf, of kingdoms too wondrous to be reached by mortal ships. Perhaps, they said, Atlantis had not been destroyed but concealed waiting, like Avalon, or like the Isles of the Blessed, for some chosen sailor to find it. When the age of exploration dawned, with sails billowing and compasses pointing to lands once thought unreachable, the story surged anew. Columbus himself carried with him not only charts and ambitions, but also the murmurs of Atlantis. In the Caribbean, in the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, whose name itself seemed to recall the lost land, explorers thought they saw signs. Strange ruins in the shallows, unexpected currents, the vastness of a world that seemed to hide more than it revealed. Others pointed to the Azores, those lonely islands rising from the mid-Atlantic, as the scattered bones of Atlantis. Maps were drawn, names scribbled, and everywhere the story resurfaced, half history, half dream. Yet, even as the story spread across seas, it also seeped into other cultures, far from Europe. Among the peoples of Mesoamerica, myths already spoke of lands drowned beneath the ocean. The Maya and Aztec told of floods that had ended earlier. Worlds of continents swallowed whole, of survivors who carried knowledge across waters. Some modern voices have asked, could these myths be independent echoes of the same memory that Plato recorded? Or are they simply the universal human recognition of water's power to destroy? The Hopi in the deserts of North America spoke of previous worlds destroyed by fire and flood, and of migrations guided by the stars. In Polynesia, stories of lands that vanished beneath waves are woven into chants and genealogies. Again and again, humanity dreams of islands lost to the sea. Is Atlantis only the Greek version of a tale that belongs to us all? By the Renaissance, as learning surged and old texts were rediscovered, Atlantis leaped back into European imagination with renewed force. Philosophers, alchemists, and explorers alike were captivated. Sir Francis Bacon wrote of the new Atlantis, not as a retelling of Plato's tale, but as a vision of a utopian society built on knowledge and science. In his dream, Atlantis was not a memory of the past, but a blueprint for the future, an island where wisdom reigned, where secrets of nature were unlocked, where humanity rose not through conquest, but through understanding. His words fed into the veins of Enlightenment thinkers, and Atlantis became both a symbol of loss and of aspiration. At the same time, cartographers began sketching it boldly onto their maps. The coasts of the Americas. Sailors returned with tales of islands that appeared and disappeared, volcanic lands that rose in smoke only to vanish again beneath the waves. Every strange report, every uncharted rock became a candidate for the lost land. Atlantis was not just a myth, it was a destination. And as compasses turned and stars were charted, it became, for some, an obsession. In the 19th century, the legend took on new colors once more. The rise of archaeology, geology, and the rediscovery of ancient texts stirred imaginations. Writers like Ignatius Donnelly declared boldly that Atlantis was real, that it had been the mother culture from which Egypt, Mesopotamia, and even Mesoamerica had sprung. He imagined a world where knowledge of pyramids, agriculture, and astronomy had spread outward from a great island empire, only to be scattered when the seas swallowed it whole. His books sold in droves, his arguments echoed in parlors and lecture halls, and suddenly Atlantis was not a forgotten story, but a central key to human history. For believers, it explained everything: the similarities between distant cultures, the sudden rise of civilization, the mysteries of lost technologies. For skeptics, it was fantasy, speculation woven into a cloak of pseudo-history. And even now, in the modern age, the story continues to transform. Some see Atlantis in the deep ocean trenches revealed by sonar. Others in the black sands of Santorini, where volcanic eruptions echo Plato's tale. Some search the coasts of Spain and Morocco, believing the ruins lie buried beneath mudflats and shifting sands. Others look to Antarctica, imagining a continent, once free of ice, where civilizations thrived. Still others whisper of dimensions, of parallel worlds, of lost knowledge encoded in myth. The interpretations multiply endlessly, each one adding to the tapestry. And what of us, here, in the quiet of this night? We listen to the echoes of all those voices, each telling the story anew. Egypt, Rome, medieval monks, explorers, philosophers, modern seekers, all bending the legend into shapes that fit their own fears and hopes. Perhaps Atlantis is real, a land once proud and mighty, drowned by the ocean's hand. Perhaps it is only a parable, a mirror of our own civilizations, forever reminded of their fragility. Or perhaps it is something stranger still, a memory older than nations, older than writing, carried in the marrow of humanity, of floods survived, of lands lost, of yearning for a place that is gone but not forgotten. As you drift deeper, you may feel the currents of all these retellings swirl together, a sea of voices carrying the same melody, a melody of loss, of longing, of hope that somewhere, beneath the waves or beyond the horizon, Atlantis waits, not as a ruin, but as an idea, undying. And with that thought, Soft as the hush of distant surf, the chapter closes, not with an ending, but with a ripple that continues outward into the next mystery. The ocean does not yield its secrets easily. Night after night, explorers, dreamers, and seekers of forgotten worlds have watched the horizon and wondered what lies beneath the restless surface. Somewhere in the shifting waves and rolling tides, the memory of Atlantis lingers not in a single place, but in a constellation of fragments scattered across the earth. To follow these fragments is to follow a trail that winds across continents, through ancient ruins, through whispered legends, and through the silence of the deep itself. It is to step into a mystery where every answer only multiplies the questions, where every discovery is a door to yet another hidden chamber of possibility. For centuries, the search for Atlantis has been a quest without end, an obsession that has drawn scholars, mystics, and wanderers into uncharted waters. Some looked for it in the Mediterranean, convinced that Plato had cloaked a real history in the form of allegory. Others cast their eyes westward, believing the lost island lay somewhere beyond the Pillars of Heracles in the wide expanse of the Atlantic. Still others believed it had been swallowed not by the ocean, but by time itself, its story remembered only in shards of myth preserved by distant cultures. What unites them is not certainty, but longing, the feeling that beneath the fabric of the known world lies a forgotten chapter that could change the way we understand our own beginnings. Imagine standing on the shore of the island of Santorini, once known as Thera. The sea is calm today, but beneath it lies a history of fire and devastation. Over 3,000 years ago, this island was torn apart by one of the most violent volcanic eruptions in recorded history. Ash darkened the skies, waves battered the surrounding lands, and entire settlements vanished in a storm of fire and water. To those who came after, the ruins of Thera spoke of a prosperous, advanced people wiped out in a single moment of cataclysm. Some scholars believe that this memory of a flourishing world drowned in sudden catastrophe may have been the seed that blossomed into Plato's tale of Atlantis. The shapes of collapsed walls and buried frescoes became the outlines of a vanished city, magnified by imagination and myth into something far greater. But others were not satisfied with this explanation. For them, Atlantis was not confined to the familiar waters of the Aegean. They pointed instead to the islands of the Atlantic itself, places like the Azores, where volcanic cliffs rise sharply from the sea, shrouded in mist and legend. These islands, remote and mysterious, were once thought to be remnants of a greater landmass that stretched across the ocean. Sailors whispered that strange ruins lay beneath the waves nearby, and in the maps of old cartographers, faint outlines of phantom islands can still be seen, as though memory itself had imprinted them onto parchment. Were these the last scattered peaks of Atlantis, lingering above the waterline like tombstones of a sunken world? The trail does not end there. Far across the ocean, on the coasts of Central and South America, stone cities rise from the jungles, their temples adorned with carvings of gods and symbols of power. The Mayans, the Aztecs, the Incas all spoke of origins that were not entirely their own, of ancestors who came from across the sea, bringing knowledge and order. In the legends of the Maya, there is mention of a place called Aztlan, a homeland of the ancestors, a place of water and abundance. Some have wondered, Was Aztlan another echo of Atlantis, refracted through time and carried across the waves in the memories of seafarers? The similarity of names is tantalizing, though perhaps coincidental. Yet the stories of strangers who arrived from distant lands, of sudden floods and divine punishments, mirror so closely the shape of Plato's tale that one cannot help but wonder if they are all fragments of the same broken mirror. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived, they heard stories of sunken temples, of cities swallowed by the sea, of treasures lost beneath lakes and rivers. At Lake Titicaca, high in the Andes, the Inca spoke of a place where the gods had first brought light into the world. Underneath those waters, divers today still find stone structures, terraces, and walls, remnants of a people whose memory stretches far into antiquity. Could this be another piece of the puzzle? A reminder that entire civilizations have indeed been erased, leaving only whispers beneath the waves. Still farther afield, the trail of Atlantis leads to the distant lands of India, where ancient texts like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana speak of golden cities, of cosmic wars, of floods that reshaped the earth. Along the coasts of modern-day India, particularly near the city of Dwarka, ruins have been discovered beneath the seawalls and streets that seem to date back thousands of years, older than the civilizations we once thought were the first. To some, this is proof that advanced societies did exist long before our textbooks tell us they did, and that Atlantis was not a singular place, but a recurring story cycle of rise and destruction that has played out again and again across the world. And then there are the legends of the Celts and the Irish, who told of Hybrazil, a phantom island that appeared once every 7 years off the western coast of Ireland. Sailors swore they had seen it, shimmering in the distance, only to watch it vanish as they drew near. Was Hybrazil another face of Atlantis, a memory of land lost to the sea, forever unreachable? Or was it a vision from the collective imagination of seafarers, a dream of the unreachable horizon? Wherever one looks, the echoes of Atlantis seem to appear ever in solid certainty, but in fragments, in half-seen reflections, the same pattern repeats. A great people, gifted with knowledge or power, brought low by catastrophe, their memory preserved only in myth and ruin. It is as if humanity itself cannot stop telling this story, as though it is written not just in the stones of vanished cities, but in the deep recesses of memory carried across generations. Why do we keep finding these echoes? Perhaps because the ocean itself is a keeper of secrets. Beneath its surface lie entire landscapes hidden from view, submerged plains, mountains, and valleys that were once dry land during the last ice age, 12,000 years ago. Sea levels were far lower, and vast regions of what are now continental shelves were exposed. Here, humans may have lived, built, dreamed, and told stories. When the waters rose, those places vanished, and the memory of them may have become the legends we now call Atlantis. As we drift deeper into this mystery, one truth becomes clear. Atlantis may never be a single city, nor a single place. It may be a mosaic made of many lost worlds, each remembered in its own way, each contributing to the myth that Plato set down. Perhaps it is the story of Thera, magnified into grandeur. Perhaps it is the Azores, the Andes, Dwarka, Hybrazia, blended into one. Or perhaps it is a story older still, reaching back to a time before history, when rising seas erased entire chapters of the human journey. And so the search continues, not just in the waters and ruins of the world, but in the human mind itself. For Atlantis is not merely about a city or an island. It is about the longing for a golden age, for a time when humanity was closer to the gods, to wisdom, to the mysteries of existence. It is about the fear of hubris and the reminder of how fragile civilizations can be. It is about the eternal dance between memory and forgetting, between what we know and what we dream. As you close your eyes and listen to the waves in your mind, imagine them carrying you across these fragments, from Santorini to the Azores, from the jungles of the Americas to the high lakes of the Andes, from the coasts of India to the phantom islands of Celtic lore. Each wave carries with it a story, each crest a fragment of the forgotten. Together they form a song that humanity has been humming for millennia, a lullaby of loss and remembrance. The echoes of Atlantis do not demand answers. They ask only that we listen, that we wonder, that we remain open to the possibility that beneath the ordinary world lies a deeper story waiting to be told. And in that wondering, perhaps we find not just the memory of a lost civilization, but the reflection of ourselves, our hopes, our fears, our dreams of what was and what might be again. The ocean is endless, and the mystery of Atlantis is endless with it. We follow its trail, not because we expect to find a final answer, but because the search itself carries us into the heart of the unknown. And in that drifting, in that soft surrender to mystery, we find ourselves rocked gently, like a vessel on quiet waters, until the pull of sleep gathers us, and the voices of the waves carry us into dreams where lost worlds live again. The story of Atlantis begins not in the ocean, but in words spoken in the quiet halls of ancient Greece. It was Plato, the philosopher, who first gave us the tale, who set down in his dialogues the memory of a city both marvelous and doomed. He spoke of an island beyond the pillars of Heracles, larger than Libya and Asia combined, home to a powerful civilization whose kings ruled with wisdom and strength. But in time, he said, corruption entered their hearts. Pride, greed, and ambition replaced the harmony of their early days, and the gods, angered by their arrogance, sent earthquakes and floods that sank Atlantis into the sea in a single day and night. To many, it was nothing more than allegory, a story meant to illustrate the dangers of hubris and the fleeting nature of human greatness. Yet to others, it was too vivid, too precise, too compelling to be mere invention. They wondered if behind the philosopher's parable lay the dim reflection of something real. For more than 2 millennia, seekers have traced the lines of that story, mapping them onto the earth, the seas, and the sky. Some argued that Atlantis lay in the Mediterranean, close to the lands Plato knew. They looked to Crete and the Minoan civilization, which flourished with art, trade, and seafaring skill before being devastated by the eruption of Thera. Around 1600 BCE, archaeologists unearthed frescoes that spoke of beauty, palaces that spoke of power, and evidence of sudden ruin. Could it be, they wondered, that this memory, carried across generations, reached the ears of Solon, the Greek statesman whose travels in Egypt supposedly brought the tale to Athens? Was Atlantis simply Thera, magnified by the imagination of time? Others disagreed. For them, Atlantis could not be confined to the narrow seas of Greece. Plato had said it was beyond the Pillars of Heracles, which most took to mean the Strait of Gibraltar. Beyond those straits lay the wide Atlantic, a vast, unknown in Plato's time, a place that beckoned with mystery. There, they argued, must the lost island have stood. Some pointed to the Azores, those remote volcanic islands rising from the depths. Sailors spoke of strange stone formations beneath the water, of sunken roads glimpsed through the clear shallows. Early maps sometimes showed phantom lands nearby, islands that later vanished from charts, as though the cartographers had preserved echoes of a continent that no longer existed. The Renaissance rekindled this fascination. With the voyages of Columbus and the discovery of the Americas, many wondered if the New World itself was Atlantis. Here were vast lands beyond the ocean, teeming with civilizations unknown to Europe. Civilizations with pyramids, calendars, and myths of floods and sunken homelands. The Aztecs spoke of Aztlan, a place of origin across the waters. The Maya told of floods that reshaped the earth. The Inca remembered Lake Titicaca as the cradle of creation, where gods brought light into the world after the darkness of catastrophe. To European ears, these sounded like Atlantean echoes, memories of a drowned golden age refracted into new forms. In Lake Titicaca, explorers later found stone structures beneath the water walls, terraces, perhaps temples. These spoke of a people whose reach and skill exceeded what was once thought possible at such heights. If such achievements could be lost and hidden beneath the waters of a high Andean lake, why not also beneath the deeper seas of the Atlantic? Even in the far reaches of India, the story seemed to resurface. Ancient texts, like the Mahabharata, spoke of cities swallowed by waves, of wars fought with weapons of unimaginable power, of floods that reshaped entire worlds. Along the coast near Dwarka, divers discovered what appeared to be the remains of walls and streets far beneath the water. Some believed they had found the legendary city of Krishna, lost thousands of years ago. Others went further, suggesting that this was yet another piece of the Atlantean puzzle, that civilizations had risen and fallen long before what modern historians considered the dawn of history. The Celts, too, told of lost lands. In the lore of the Irish, Hybrasil shimmered on the horizon, visible only once every 7 years, a paradise that slipped away as sailors approached. The Bretons of France remembered Ys, a city of splendor swallowed by the sea as punishment for sin. The Welsh spoke of Cantregueled, a fertile kingdom drowned when its gates to the sea were left open. Each of these tales echoed the same refrain: a golden land, a great people, undone by water, remembered in longing. Were these coincidences, or were they the cultural memories of real places lost to the sea at the end of the last ice age, when rising waters covered vast coastal plains? Geology tells us that between 12 and 10,000 years ago, the seas did indeed rise dramatically, swallowing lands that had been home to humans for millennia. Entire regions that are now continental shelves lay above the waves then, rich in rivers and fertile soil. People would have lived there, hunted there, built there, and told their stories there. When the waters rose, they would have fled, carrying with them the memory of their drowned homelands. Perhaps Atlantis is not one place, but many, not one story, but a chorus of them, remembered differently, in different corners of the world, and still the search continues. Off the coast of Cuba, sonar readings once revealed vast, symmetrical shapes. Deep beneath the water pyramids, it was said, or avenues of stone. Debate raged over whether they were natural formations or the remnants of something built by human hands. Near Bimini, in the Bahamas, divers found what became known as the Bimini roadblocks of stone laid out like a causeway beneath the shallow sea. To some, it was proof of a lost city. To others, nothing more than natural beach rock fractured into neat lines by geological processes. Yet the allure of the possibility keeps drawing eyes and imaginations back to these places. In Spain, researchers once suggested that marshlands near Cadiz might conceal the remains of a city that fit Plato's description, a ringed metropolis surrounded by water. Satellite images revealed strange geometric patterns beneath the soil, prompting speculation that the true Atlantis lay not in the deep Atlantic, but in the shifting wetlands of southern Iberia. Meanwhile, in North Africa, some have pointed to the Richet structure in Mauritania, a vast circular formation in the desert, eerily reminiscent of Plato's description of concentric rings. Could the Sahara itself hide the ruins of an ancient sea kingdom buried now beneath sand instead of waves? The questions multiply, but the answers remain elusive. Perhaps that is the true nature of Atlantis, a place to be found, but a mirror that reflects our own yearning for origins, for greatness, for a golden age lost. Each new theory tells us not just about the past, but about the present, about what we long to believe, about the stories we tell to make sense of the world. Atlantis has become more than a legend. It is a symbol, a vessel into which countless hopes and fears have been poured. To some, it represents the height of human achievement, proof that advanced civilizations existed long before recorded history. To others, it is a warning, a reminder that pride and excess can bring even the greatest societies to ruin. To still others, it is a dream of paradise, a land where wisdom and abundance were once real and might one day be regained. In the end, the ocean remains silent. Its waves cover whatever lies beneath. Its tides guard the secrets of millennia. Divers descend, satellites scan, scholars debate, but Atlantis remains just beyond reach, seen only in glimpses, felt only in echoes, and yet perhaps that is its power. A city we could find and map would be only archaeology. A city we can never quite reach becomes myth, and myth has the power to shape us, to guide us, to whisper to us in the stillness of the night. Close your eyes and imagine yourself drifting now upon those endless waters. Beneath you lie the drowned plains of another age, places where people once walked, once dreamed, once told stories that have survived only as fragments in our myths. Around you, the horizon stretches in every direction, limitless, eternal. Somewhere, out there, perhaps, lies Atlantis. Or perhaps it lies everywhere, woven into the stories of every culture, carried in the waves of every sea. The echoes are endless, and as long as we listen, Atlantis will never truly be lost. The night deepens, and with it, so too does the journey. We have walked among ruined towers, carved stones, silent chapels, and the shifting sands of myth. We have followed the Knights Templar into forgotten forests, across storm-swept oceans, and into vaults of symbols that whisper across centuries. We have listened to echoes of Atlantis and glimpsed the lost lands beneath the sea. And now, as the story moves forward, it carries us into the heart of mystery itself, the place where history dissolves into memory, and memory dissolves into dream. Every age, it seems, has its hidden keepers. They are not always knights in white mantles or scholars bent over parchment. Sometimes they are monks, sometimes masons, sometimes wanderers with no name at all. Their work is the same: to carry forward what others would erase, to protect fragments of truth in a world that forgets too quickly. If we look closely, their traces appear in unexpected places. A symbol carved into the margin of a manuscript, a chapel aligned just so with the rising of Venus, a word passed in secret, repeated until it becomes more than a word. There is a sense, almost, that history is not linear but layered, that beneath the histories we are taught in classrooms, battles, treaties, there are older strata, hidden but enduring. Like the foundation stones beneath a cathedral, they are unseen, yet they hold up the entire edifice. The Templar legends belong to this deeper layer. So too does Atlantis, and the myths of lost lands remembered across cultures. These are not footnotes to history. They are the invisible scaffolding that gives meaning to everything else. Consider for a moment the persistence of the flood myth. Nearly every culture, no matter how distant, no matter how isolated, speaks of a time when waters rose and swallowed the world. In Mesopotamia, there is Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh building his ark. In the Hebrew scriptures, Noah; in India, Manu saved by the fish who warned him. In the Americas, countless tribes tell of canoes that saved a few while the world drowned. In the Pacific, the Maori remember canoes as well, their people carried over the waters. Always there is the deluge, always the few survivors, always the rebirth of the world. Could it be that these are not merely stories, but memories of an event so vast, so searing, that humanity itself could not forget? When the last ice age ended, seas rose by hundreds of feet, swallowing coastal plains across the globe. For people who lived along those fertile shores, it would have seemed as though the world itself was collapsing. Villages, hunting grounds, temples gone, drowned in weeks or months. The trauma would have imprinted itself on the human mind, passed down through story. In time, the details blurred, but the core remained. The waters rose, we fled, we began again. Perhaps Atlantis is only one expression of that shared memory, a particularly vivid telling preserved by Plato, yet resonant because it strikes the same chord all our ancestors carried. And yet, there are those who sense more. They believe Atlantis, and the flood myths do not simply echo natural events, but point toward something deliberate, forgotten civilization. Advanced and vast, wiped from the record, but not entirely from the world. They point to ancient sites that seem older than they should be. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, with its megalithic enclosures dating back 12,000 years, long before agriculture was supposed to exist. Pyramids that rise in both Egypt and Mesoamerica, built with uncanny precision, aligned to stars with a knowledge supposedly beyond their time. The great trilithons of Baalbek in Lebanon, each weighing hundreds of tons, placed with an accuracy that defies simple tools. To believers, these are not isolated wonders, but fingerprints of a vanished age. If such a civilization existed, Where did it go? Some suggest it ended in catastrophe, floods, earthquakes, perhaps even cosmic impacts. Others imagine it did not end at all, but simply transformed, its remnants seeding the cultures we know as Sumer, Egypt, India, and beyond. The Templars, with their strange symbols and hidden geometry, are sometimes woven into this narrative, too, as if they were guardians of fragments from that world, fragments passed down in secret, awaiting rediscovery. Skeptics raise their brows at such claims. They remind us that human ingenuity does not require lost civilizations to explain its triumphs. People are clever, resourceful, and given enough time, they will align stones with stars and carve mountains into temples. Yet even skeptics often find themselves haunted by the precision of certain alignments, by the recurrence of the same myths in far-flung lands, by the peculiar sense that our past may be deeper than the record admits. As the centuries turn, the yearning for Atlantis, for hidden knowledge, never vanishes. In the Renaissance, scholars scoured ancient texts for references. In the age of exploration, sailors looked for islands where none existed. In the 19th century, spiritualists and visionaries like Helena Blavatsky spoke of Atlantean wisdom, of lost sciences, of a golden age whose echoes guided the present. Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, claimed in trance to see visions of Atlantis, of crystal technologies, of survivors who fled to Egypt. Whether one believes or not, these visions carried enormous influence, shaping the modern imagination. Even today, Atlantis lingers at the edge of science and speculation. Oceanographers map the seafloor, noting strange formations. Archaeologists cautiously probe submerged ruins. Satellite imagery reveals shapes in deserts and swamps that spark wonder. Meanwhile, storytellers weave it all together, blending fact and myth into tales that remind us of how thin the line between the two can be. But perhaps the most important truth of Atlantis is not whether it existed, but why we search for it. We look for Atlantis because we are haunted by the sense of having lost something, not just a city, not just a people, but a way of being. Atlantis, in all its guises, represents balance between humanity and nature, between knowledge and wisdom, between the mortal and the divine. In Plato's story, that balance was broken. Pride and greed undid what harmony had built, and in that undoing there is a warning for every age. The Templars understood this too, in their own way. Their order rose in purity and purpose, bound by vows, guided by faith. They grew in power and wealth, and with it came suspicion, jealousy, corruption from within, and pressure from without. In time, they too fell, their ships scattered, their knowledge hidden, their name marked with both reverence and suspicion. In their arc, we see a smaller Atlantis, a reminder that all human endeavors, no matter how noble, can be undone if balance is lost. As the candlelight of history flickers, we find ourselves drawn to these parallels. Lost cities, lost orders, lost wisdom. They may not be the same, yet they rhyme, and it is in the rhyme that we find meaning. Each story whispers the same truth, that nothing is permanent, that greatness carries within it the seed of its own downfall, but also that memory endures, and through memory the chance of renewal. Imagine yourself once more standing on the shore. Before you stretches an ocean black as ink. The stars are mirrored in its surface, shimmering as though the heavens themselves are hidden beneath the waves. Somewhere, far out there, lies the dream of Atlantis. Somewhere within you lies the echo of every flood and every loss. The air is cool, the tide steady, the night vast. You breathe in, and with each breath you are carried back through time. Back to the days before memory, back to the first stories whispered by firelight. The voices of those who came before us still murmur in the dark. They speak of golden lands drowned, of temples aligned to stars, of orders of knights who knew secrets hidden from kings. They speak in fragments, in symbols, in echoes. We cannot always understand, but we can listen. And in the act of listening, we keep the thread unbroken. Perhaps that is the real Atlantis. Not an island of stone, but the continuity of human wonder. The refusal to let silence have the last word. The insistence that even when towers fall, even when seas rise, even when orders crumble, the story continues. We carry it forward. We add to it. We keep seeking, not because we expect certainty, but because the seeking itself gives shape to who we are. And so the story flows on. From Templar halls to drowned plains, from carved chapels to imagined continents, from the stars above to the stones below. It carries us across centuries, across oceans, across the threshold of sleep itself. And as it does, we are reminded that we too are part of the tale. Our questions, our dreams, our longings are the latest verses in a song that began long before us and will continue long after. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Atlantis still waits, not as ruins to be measured, but as possibility to be remembered. As long as we dream, it will not sink. Beneath the hush of waves and the stretch of night, the story drifts onward, not as a tale that must be solved in one telling, but as a current that winds slowly through forgotten depths. The 12th chapter begins where silence itself becomes a companion, and the echo of Atlantis lingers not only as a ruin, but as a presence, a haunting that has never quite faded from human memory. By now, the city that Plato spoke of has been cast and recast in countless forms, from a golden empire, swallowed by the sea, to a metaphor woven into the fabric of philosophy. But here, the dream thickens. For to truly follow Atlantis, one must not only listen to the voices of ancient writers, but also to the whispers carried in myths that emerged far from Greece, and to the patterns of ruins that do not fit neatly into the history books. Imagine for a moment the scattered pieces of the human story pyramids rising in deserts, megaliths standing against the sky in distant fields, stone circles whose alignment seems to follow not chance but stars. Again and again, cultures that never touched each other appear to be humming the same tune, building with the same obsessions, carving symbols that echo across oceans. And in these echoes, Atlantis hides, perhaps not as a single sunken island, but as the seed of something greater, a knowledge shared, a memory half buried in the collective human mind. It is here that the narrative takes us into the realm of comparative myths, into legends told by voices separated by continents and centuries, yet carrying strangely similar shadows. In Egypt, long before Plato, the priests told Solon that Atlantis was not just a tale, but a history that their own ancestors preserved. The Egyptians, keepers of ancient scrolls, spoke of a powerful people who once lived beyond the pillars of Hercules. They described them as masters of both war and architecture, conquerors whose ambition stretched across known lands, yet their pride, their insatiable hunger, led to their downfall. These stories, preserved in fragments, hint at the same moral thread Plato carried into his dialogues, the warning against hubris, the inevitability of ruin when mortals reach too far. But was this only allegory, or was it memory wrapped in allegory, the kind of tale that disguises truth in the clothing of philosophy? Consider also the legends of the Celts. Across the misty isles of the north, bards whispered of Tir na Nog, the land of youth. It was said to be lush and radiant, a realm of beauty where time moved differently, where the dead might find peace and the living might wander, if chosen. Though different in texture from Atlantis, this western paradise carries the same motif, a lost land beyond the sea, a place both real and unreal, hovering on the edge of memory and myth. Why should so many cultures dream of a vanished land in the West? Why should the horizon itself seem haunted? Among the Maya and Aztec, stories told of great floods and sunken civilizations, of cycles of destruction and rebirth. The Aztecs spoke of previous ages of the world, swept away by catastrophe. In these myths, entire peoples were erased, their temples and monuments swallowed, only to be remembered in fragments by their descendants. Across the ocean, separated by thousands of miles and lifetimes, the same rhythm plays. A golden age, a fall, a deluge, a memory of something drowned. Atlantis may be only one name for this recurring pattern, one mask on a face that humanity has been trying to recall since the beginning. But legends are not the only threads in this tapestry. Stones to speak. Beneath the waters of Yanaguni, off the coast of Japan, divers discovered vast terraces, steps, and platforms carved into the rock. To some, it is only natural erosion, a coincidence of geology that resembles the hands of masons. To others, it is the ghost of an ancient city, a civilization drowned in antiquity, preserved in silence beneath the waves. The same argument surrounds ruins in Lake Titicaca, where submerged temples rest beneath South American waters. Are these remnants proof of forgotten ages, or simply the result of shifting landscapes and patient time? The debate continues, but the echoes are undeniable. Structures beneath seas, whispers of lands swallowed whole. But because it demonstrates that humanity's past is far less tidy than we imagine. And then there are the stars. So many of the world's oldest monuments, pyramids in Egypt, mounds in North America, stone circles in Europe line, not randomly, but with celestial bodies. Orion's belt, Sirius, the Pleiades, constellations that have guided eyes for millennia. Some argue that such precision is beyond coincidence, that it hints at a forgotten unity of knowledge, as if once there was a great network of minds who understood the heavens better than we credit them. If Atlantis was real, perhaps its people were astronomers as much as kings, a society whose obsession with the stars carried forward into the cultures that followed. But what of the great flood itself, the catastrophe that Plato described? Modern science whispers in agreement. Throughout the world, myths of floods abound. Noah's Ark in the Hebrew tradition, Utnapishtim in the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, Manu in Hindu scripture, Deucalion in Greek lore. All tell of waters rising, of civilizations undone by waves. Could this be a shared memory of the end of the last ice age, when glaciers melted, seas surged, and coastlines shifted? Around 12,000 years ago, as ice gave way to water, vast portions of habitable land were swallowed forever. Is it not possible that somewhere in those lost coasts lay a great city, remembered dimly as Atlantis? The question grows more intricate when one considers not only myth and geology, but also the persistence of names and symbols. Plato described the Atlanteans as children of Poseidon, god of the sea, who built concentric circles of land and water, surrounding their shining city with rings. In ruins across the world, circles, recurhenges, ceremonial grounds, spiral carvings, etched into stone. Were these coincidences of design, or remnants of a shared heritage that Atlantis, whether literal or symbolic, once inspired? As the night deepens, let the thought drift slowly. Perhaps Atlantis was never only one place. Perhaps it is both memory and metaphor, both ruin and dream. Perhaps what Plato recorded was not the story of a single city, but the memory of an Aegea time when civilizations rose to heights now forgotten, when humans were more connected to stars, seas, and one another than we can imagine. And perhaps the flood that ended it scattered not just people, but memory itself, breaking a unified story into shards that landed in Egypt, in Greece, in Ireland, in the Americas. Each shard became a legend, a myth, a whisper of paradise or ruin. And across centuries, we have tried to piece those shards back together, giving the shape we know as Atlantis. Yet for all that has been said, the mystery does not close. Instead, it invites, for the more we search, the more the fragments seem to multiply. Each ruin underwater, each myth of deluge, each star-lined temple deepens the labyrinth than solves it. That is the enchantment of Atlantis. Not that it is explained, but that it is never explained fully, always slipping just beyond the grasp, like a city half visible beneath dark water, glowing faintly, impossibly, in the mines. And so this chapter lingers here, among myths and ruins, where certainty fades and wonder rises. Atlantis, whether fact or fable, persists not because we prove it, but because we cannot let it go. Its story is the story of human longing, its longing for a perfect past, for answers hidden beneath waves, for the possibility that we are not the first to dream, to build, to fall. Tonight, as the waves murmur against unseen shores, let the thought drift with you. Somewhere, beyond the reach of maps and time, a city waits, whether in stone or in memory, whether in truth or in dream. And perhaps, if we listen carefully enough, we might hear it still. The sea is never still. It folds and unfolds itself like an endless thought, forever returning to its own beginning. When we enter chapter 13, the world of Atlantis no longer feels like a question of if, but rather of when and how. By now the echoes have carried us across ruins, myths, star maps, and floods. What remains is not simply speculation, but a haunting sense that something once stood behind all these fragments, something vast and luminous, reduced now to scattered traces. It is here, in this twilight between memory and forgetting, that the imagination begins to stitch the pieces together. And in that act of weaving, Atlantis comes alive again. Not as a single city in stone, but as an inheritance of lost knowledge, waiting just beneath the skin of the world. Imagine standing at the edge of the Atlantic Ocean, gazing westward. The horizon glows with the faint line of a dying sun, and you cannot help but wonder how many ships set sail from here, from Iberia, from North Africa, from the isles of the Aegean, bearing maps, myths, and secrets. The ancients spoke of lands beyond, of islands where the gods once lived, where men learned arts and sciences that vanished when the sea took them back. The Greeks called them Hesperides, the islands of the West. The Egyptians hinted at a place where the Nile's knowledge began, a distant homeland where sacred geometry first unfolded. And farther north, the Norse sagas sang of Vinland, a rich and fertile land across the ocean waves. Each culture touched the edge of something greater, but each in its own tongue, as if they were all recalling different verses of a song whose chorus has been lost. Perhaps this is what Atlantis truly is, not a single ruin beneath waves, but a pattern of memory spread across humanity. When Plato wrote his tale, he claimed he was passing along words from Solon, who had in turn heard them from Egyptian priests, but who whispered to the Egyptians and to those before them. Knowledge flows like rivers, branching and converging, carrying silt from unseen mountains. By the time it reaches us, it is both murky and fertile, rich with sediment we cannot separate. That sediment is Atlantis, fragments of memory embedded in myth, particles of truth drifting in allegory. And yet, the dream demands form. Our minds resist leaving Atlantis as only a metaphor. We crave walls and towers, ships and temples, streets where people once walked. So let us try to see it, not through Plato's description alone, but through the imagination that myths invite. Picture concentric rings of land and water, canals glittering beneath the sun. At the heart, a temple rises, its columns gleaming with copper, its walls inscribed with symbols that bind heaven to earth. Around it, markets buzz with traders carrying goods from across the known world, spices, metals, scrolls, strange fruits, never seen in the Aegean. Priests climb steps to measure the stars, to record alignments, to mark seasons not only of crops but of planets. Warriors in bronze and white linen march along causeways, their banners rippling with images of dolphins and trident. Children chase each other along marble courtyards, while artisans chisel patterns into stone, patterns so precise they echo the movements of constellations above. It is tempting to dismiss such visions as pure fantasy, but is it truly more absurd than believing all human progress arose separately in scattered bursts, with no forgotten seed behind it? We are asked to believe that pyramids rose in Egypt, ziggurats in Mesopotamia, step pyramids in Mexico, all without influence, without communication, without some ancestral source of knowledge that drifted across oceans. Perhaps Atlantis was that seed knot, a kingdom of endless perfection, but a society that carried geometry, astronomy, and navigation further than we credit. When it fell, its survivors scattered like sparks in wind, igniting new fires wherever they landed. And here, in this scattering, the story shifts. What if Atlantis was never meant to be one place, but many? A network, a federation of knowledge bearers stretched across the world, bound not by empire, but by wisdom. When the cataclysm came, whether earthquake, flood, or the slow but crushing rise of seas, they fled. Some to Egypt, where the Nile Temples became their libraries. Some to the high Andes, where stories of Viracocha, the god who came across the waters, still linger. Some to the islands of the Mediterranean, where myths of gods who once walked as men took root. And some, perhaps, farther still, into the Americas, leaving behind stone carvings, rituals, and symbols that scholars puzzle over to this day. If so, Atlantis does not lie in one ruin waiting to be found. It lies in all of them. In every temple aligned with Orion, in every flood myth that remembers the sea's hunger, in every circle of stone that mirrors the heavens. Atlantis is not a city, but a chapter of human memory, the one we have not yet rewritten into our official histories. And because it is unwritten, it lingers like a phantom, always inviting us to wonder. But let us return, for a moment, to Plato's warning. He spoke not only of the glory of Atlantis, but of its fall. Its people, he said, grew proud, greedy, corrupt. They waged wars beyond their borders, driven by hunger for conquest. Their brilliance turned inward, their harmony fractured, until the gods themselves withdrew their favor. Then came the sea, and with it the silence. For Atlantis is not only about what humanity may have achieved, but also about what we may lose when ambition outpaces wisdom. Every empire since has carried a little of Atlantis within it, Rome rising and collapsing beneath its own weight. Empires of industry spreading and consuming until they exhaust themselves. Atlantis is both hope and warning, both golden age and cautionary tale. Perhaps this is why its story endures, because it does not ask us merely to marvel, but to reflect. When we dream of Atlantis, we are dreaming of ourselves, of what we could become, and of how easily it could all dissolve beneath the tide. And yet, the mystery keeps deepening. For some modern researchers argue that Atlantis may not have been west of Greece at all, but eastward, tied to the islands of the Mediterranean. Santorini, once home to the Minoan civilization, erupted with a violence that shattered its world. Ash, fire, waves all combined into a catastrophe that may have been remembered in Plato's tale. Others point to the Azores, mid-Atlantic peaks that could be the last vestiges of a larger drowned plateau. Still others whisper of Antarctica, once ice-free, harboring ancient maps that depict its coastline before glaciers entombed it. The theories multiply like mirrors facing mirrors, each reflecting a possibility, none wholly provable, all feeding the mystery. But what if Atlantis is not where, but when? What if it belongs not to geography, but to memory's deeper time, to the age when seas rose 12,000 years ago, washing away coasts that had been home to untold millions? If we lose sight of this, we miss the larger truth that entire chapters of humanity may be missing, erased not by war or neglect, but by the ocean itself. Atlantis, then, is the face we give to all those forgotten chapters. It is the name of absence itself, a single word to capture the enormity of what the sea has taken. Still, we return to it. We cannot help ourselves. Dream that history is not finished, that beneath waves and soil secrets remain, waiting to be uncovered. And if those secrets rise again, perhaps they will remind us not only of who we were, but of who we might become. Picture, then, a quiet night by the ocean. The stars blaze above, the tide rolls in steady rhythm, and the wind carries the faint scent of salt and stone. Close your eyes, and in the hush between waves. Imagine the sound of distant bells, Atlantean bells, tolling faintly from beneath the sea. Imagine columns rising where now only fish swim. Imagine streets lined with torches, voices speaking in languages lost. Imagine knowledge preserved in vaults of stone, waiting, waiting. Perhaps no diver will ever find them. Perhaps they exist only in dream. But dream is its own kind of truth, for it guides us where maps cannot. This is Atlantis at its most powerful, not as a ruin to be excavated, but as a mirror held to humanity's longing. It reminds us that we are not the first to rise, and we may not be the last to fall. It asks us to wonder not only about the past, but about the fragility of the present, about what we too might leave behind when waves come again. And so, chapter 13 closes, not with certainty, but with invitation. Atlantis, whether city or symbol, survives because we keep it alive. Every telling reshapes it, every listener adds to its form. Stop rising, built not of stone and copper, but of memory, imagination, and yearning. It waits, as it has always waited, in the silence between waves, calling us to remember what we have lost and to dream of what we might still find. The ocean has always been a mirror. It reflects not just the sky, not just the moon, but the longings of humankind. We lean over its edge, generation after generation, and wonder what lies beneath, what has been lost to its depth, what secrets it carries that we are not yet ready to remember. Atlantis is one of those secrets, one of those reflections. By now, after so much wandering, you know that the tale of the lost city is not about ruins alone. It is about us. It is about the way we dream, the way we fear, the way we forget, and then try to remember again. As you drift deeper into this chapter, the edges of that realization grow sharper. The story bends toward its ending, but it does not rush. Like the tide, it gathers its strength slowly, drawing you in. Picture yourself standing on a cliff at twilight, the sea restless below. The air carries both cool salt and the faint warmth of the sun that has just slipped under the horizon. You can feel time stretching in two directions at once, back into the forgotten centuries of Atlantis, and forward into the still unwritten centuries of our own. The waves roll endlessly, and in their rhythm you hear not only the memory of the drowned city, but the reminder that all things move in cycles. Civilizations rise, civilizations fall, and sometimes, in the moment of falling, they leave behind a whisper that lasts longer than stones. Close your eyes and let yourself wander into the Atlantean streets one last time. They are quieter now than they have ever been in your mind. Columns stand like ghosts, murals peel away from damp walls, statues tilt under the weight of the sea. The silence is not oppressive. It is almost tender, as if the ruins themselves are aware that they are being remembered, and that remembrance is a kind of resurrection. As you move through these drowned corridors, you imagine the final days of Atlantis. The skies darken with strange clouds. The ground shudders. The sea begins to surge where it should not. In the temples, priests look up from their offerings, their voices faltering in mid-prayer. In the markets, merchants leave their stalls, sensing the earth itself has become untrustworthy. Mothers clutch their children. Lovers clasp hands. Old men stare at the horizon, as if trying to memorize it one last time. And then the waters rise. The walls crumble. The voices are swallowed, but memory somehow remains. Memory does not drown. The story of Atlantis was carried not by stone, but by words, handed down across generations, reshaped by cultures that had never seen its shores. Egyptian priests to Greek philosophers, philosophers to poets, poets to explorers, explorers to dreamers. Each added their own shade, their own meaning, until Atlantis was no longer just a city, but a mirror into which anyone could peer and see what they needed to see. To some, it was a warning of arrogance. To others, it was the hope of hidden wisdom. To still others, it was a puzzle, a mystery meant to be solved if only one looked hard enough. And as you let this realization settle, you begin to understand why the story has lasted. Myths survive because they are useful. They teach, they caution, they inspire. Atlantis is not remembered because it was destroyed, but because it still speaks. It speaks to the unease we feel about our own fragile empires. It speaks to our yearning to touch something greater, something ancient, something just beyond the horizon of certainty. It whispers to us in the same way the sea does at night, low, endless, impossible to ignore. You begin to imagine Plato again, standing before his students. He does not raise his voice. He does not gesture wildly. He speaks with calm precision. He tells them of an island greater than Asia Minor and Libya combined, an island beyond the pillars of Hercules. He describes its canals, its concentric rings, its temples plated with gold and silver, its kings descended from gods. And then, without flourish, he describes its fall, how it was swallowed by the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. The room is silent. His students sit motionless, caught between disbelief and awe. They know their teacher is not careless with words, and so they carry this story into the world. Centuries later, scholars pore over the account, debating whether Plato meant it as history or allegory. Some dismiss it outright, others cling to it fiercely, searching for proof. The mapmakers sketch possibilities at the edge of the known world. The explorers sail into uncharted waters with the name Atlantis burning in their thoughts. Each carries the myth forward, breathing it into the air of new ages. And still, the city does not die. The ruins beneath the waves seem to shift. Imagine them. Coral clings to one's smooth walls. Sea fans ripple in place of banners. Fish weave in and out of archways, as though they were citizens, going about forgotten errands. And in your mind's eye, you see a curious thing. It is as though the city wants to be found, not physically, not in coordinates and measurements, but in memory, in dream, in imagination. Perhaps that is how it survives, by continually being rediscovered, not in the ocean, but in the human heart. Drift now into the world of explorers who believed Atlantis might guide them to greatness. Picture Columbus scanning the horizon, half believing the lands he sought were echoes of Plato's tale. Picture sailors telling each other stories in the dim light of ship lanterns, whispering of islands that shimmered at dusk, only to vanish at dawn. Picture cartographers sketching shapes in the margins of their parchment maps, labeling them with names like Antalya, Hybrazil, or the Island of Seven Cities. Each name is a fragment of the Atlantean shadow, a way of keeping the possibility alive. And then move further still, into our own time. Even now, researchers dive into the depths with sonar, submersibles, and higher resolution scans. hoping to find patterns in the seabed that might reveal the truth. Theories multiply. Some say Atlantis is hidden beneath the sands of the Sahara, its ocean long vanished. Others argue it lies in the Caribbean, its temples disguised by coral reefs. Others still suggest Antarctica, buried under millennia of ice. Each claim sparks debates, books, documentaries, arguments across conference halls and internet forums. And yet none are definitive. Atlantis remains elusive, just as it always has. You realize this elusiveness is part of its power. If Atlantis were discovered tomorrow, its mystery would evaporate. It would become a site, a museum, an entry in textbooks. But as long as it hovers in uncertainty, it is alive. It is more than ruins. It is a dream that cannot be pinned down. It is a story that continues to ask questions instead of answering them. As the night deepens, you begin to feel a kinship with those who kept the tale alive. The philosophers, the sailors, the poets, the dreamers, they were all listeners, just as you are now. They all let the story settle into their minds, filling the quiet spaces with wonder. They too must have fallen asleep, imagining what it would feel like to walk those streets, to hear the fountains, to see the towers glinting in sunlight. You are part of that lineage now, another keeper of the myth. The sea grows calm in your imagination. The ruins settle. The voices fade, but they do not vanish entirely. They linger like an echo in a vast chamber, softer, more distant, but still present. You realize that Atlantis does not end. It pauses, it drifts. It waits for the next listener, the next dreamer, the next heart ready to carry it forward. That may be centuries from now, or it may be in the next moment as you drift into sleep. The story is moving closer to its last cadence, though you do not feel rushed. Instead, you feel as though the tide is pulling you gently toward a shore. Cannot yet see it. You cannot yet step upon it, but you sense it is there, waiting. And with each breath, you come nearer. Atlantis remains behind you and ahead of you, both memory and possibility. It is not gone. It is not here. It is what it has always been, a mystery beneath the waves, eternal, elusive, unforgettable. And so you rest in the stillness of this chapter, carried by the rhythm of the sea and the whisper of the myth. The final turning of the tide is close. The end is waiting, but not yet. For now, you drift in the glow of Atlantis, the civilization beneath the waves, as it carries you into dream. The sea is endless, and yet it remembers. In its currents, in its secret depths, it keeps the voices of those who once called themselves Atlanteans. Even now, as the waves crash on distant shores, as tides crawl over beaches and retreat again, there is a rhythm older than humanity, a song that has been playing since before the first word was spoken. To reach the end of Atlantis is not to close a book, but to step into the same circle the ancients once traced. It is to realize that every beginning curls back upon itself, and every ending dissolves like foam into water. When the final night of Atlantis came, it was not sudden in the way legends later suggested. It was not as if the ground split in an instant and the ocean swallowed everything whole. Rather, it was a drawn-out unraveling, like a tapestry being picked apart, thread by thread, until what remained was no longer the world they had built, but a memory of it. People sensed it in the air first, in the strange heaviness of the sky, Farmers looked at the heavens and muttered that the constellations no longer rose where they should. Priests lit candles that sputtered and hissed, refusing to hold a flame as steady as before. Sailors returned from the edges of the sea, speaking of whirlpools that had not been there the year before, of shifting currents that twisted their roots into knots. And yet, even in the shadow of disaster, the people of Atlantis carried on their lives. Children still played among the marble courtyards. Scholars still etched symbols into polished stone. Fishermen still cast their nets, though the sea now yielded fewer gifts than in the days of abundance. Perhaps it was denial, or perhaps it was faith. To live on a great island is to trust in its stability, in its permanence, as if the land itself could not betray you. Atlantis had risen from myth. Could it not withstand the wrath of earth and ocean alike? But the warnings grew louder. Some said the temples themselves began to groan. Carvings split as if under unseen pressure. The great tower of Poseidon, the one place where silver and orichalcum gleamed side by side, was said to hum with an uneasy resonance. Priests interpreted it as a sign, a vibration of divine displeasure. Farmers heard it differently, a rumble of the ground beneath, the voice of the earth preparing to speak. What is it like, one wonders, to know you are living in the twilight of a civilization? Do you cling more tightly to ritual, hoping the old ways will preserve you? Or do you abandon everything, racing toward some desperate escape? In Atlantis, both instincts appeared. Some communities retreated into prayer, filling the temples with offerings, songs, and tears. Others packed their ships with food, carvings, scrolls, and tools, hoping to outrun the tides and the trembling ground. They sailed toward the edges of the known world, believing there must be other lands across the horizon where the gods' anger had not yet fallen, and perhaps they succeeded. Legends from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and even the far-flung islands of the Mediterranean whisper of pale strangers arriving by ship, carrying strange instruments, strange knowledge, strange ways of measuring the heavens. Some called them gods, others called them wanderers. But when we peel back the names, when we listen closely to the rhythms of those stories, we find the same cadence that belonged to Atlantis. It is as if the final breath of a civilization scattered itself like seeds across the globe, planting echoes in fertile ground. The destruction itself, when it finally came, was neither swift nor merciful. The earth shook in waves, entire districts crumbling before people could run. Fires leaped from cracked altars, consuming wood, fabric, even stone. The sea withdrew in great unnatural gulfs, leaving ships stranded in harbors that suddenly had no water to hold them. For a heartbeat of silence, the people must have believed the gods had granted reprieve. And then the ocean returned higher, harder, unstoppable. Walls collapsed as easily as pottery. Towers that had once reached for the sky bent and vanished beneath foam. The air was filled with salt, ash, and screams, all torn apart by the roar of water. Yet it is not the destruction alone that lingers in memory. It is what was lost. The libraries where knowledge of the stars was etched in golden spirals. The gardens where plants from every corner of the world grew in harmony. The courts where laws older than many nations were debated under columns of marble. All of it fell silent, reduced to fragments on the seafloor. What once was the pride of the world became no more than scattered ruins, waiting for some distant future to wonder at their existence. Plato wrote of Atlantis not as an eyewitness, but as a collector of memory, taking the words of Solon, who had heard them from Egyptian priests, who themselves claimed to recall stories passed down from before their own dynasties. Even in his time, Atlantis was already an echo, already a shadow. But perhaps that is the secret to its endurance. A place fully known can be fully forgotten. A place half hidden remains alive in imagination, forever hovering between possibility and dream. And so, Atlantis endures, not in stone, but in the spaces between questions. Was it a real empire? Its people, drowned by waves we can still measure in geological strata? Was it a parable, designed to warn us of pride and greed, of powers too great for human hands? Or was it something else, a blend of memory and myth, a story so deeply etched in the collective mind of humanity that it refuses to die, no matter how many centuries pass? Those who seek Atlantis today are not merely looking for ruins. They are searching for themselves. They are asking whether history is as complete as it appears, whether beneath the polite surface of textbooks and lectures lies an ocean of secrets we have barely begun to explore. To find Atlantis would not just be to find a lost city. It would be to admit that the past is stranger than we dare to imagine. Some explorers believe the remnants lie beneath the Mediterranean in shattered caldera. Others point to the coasts of Spain and Morocco, where rings of earth still trace patterns like those described by Plato. Some push further, to the Caribbean, to Bimini Road, to sunken platforms that may be no more than natural stone, and yet, when seen from above, resembled the outlines of harbors and avenues. The search itself has become a ritual, a way of keeping Atlantis alive, even if the city itself remains hidden. But perhaps the truest Atlantis is not meant to be found. Perhaps it exists as a mirror, reflecting our longing for perfection, our fear of downfall, our awareness that every civilization is mortal. To dream of Atlantis is to dream of a height beyond our reach, and to fear that we, too, might one day collapse into the sea of time. As the story drifts to its end, imagine the ruins of Atlantis as they are now, silent beneath layers of silt, columns tilted and broken, mosaics scattered in fragments across the ocean floor. Fish glide through empty archways, coral blooms where once marble walls shone. The city sleeps, not destroyed, but transformed, folded into the life of the sea. And perhaps, in that transformation, it has achieved immortality of a different kind. Above the waves, we still whisper its name. We still tell its story. And in the telling, Atlantis rises again, not of stone, but of sound, not of marble, but of memory. It lives as long as we imagine it, as long as we close our eyes and let the waves carry us back to that golden age beneath the sun. So let the waters carry you now. Let the rhythm of the sea become the rhythm of your breath. Atlantis has not ended. It has only changed its form, passing from earth and stone into story and dream. And here, as you drift into sleep, you walk its avenues once more. You hear the distant voices of a people who built too high, who dreamed too boldly, and who now whisper their secrets only to the patient sea. And as you sink into the quiet, remember this: the story of Atlantis is not only theirs, it is ours, for every empire holds within it the same fragility. every age its own approaching tide. We listen not to mourn them, but to understand ourselves, to feel the weight of history pressing softly, like waves, against the shore, to know that even as the sea erases, it also preserves, holding memory in its endless embrace. The waves rise, the waves fall, and still Atlantis remains, not lost, not gone, but waiting, in the silence, in the deep, in the stories that cradle us as we drift to sleep.